Atomic gigantification was a sweeping Japan nation when along came a dude with an ultra attitude, a Kamen rider who's the greatest kicker of Japan. And of all, man, life's too short now, baby, to not talk big now, baby.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to a brand new episode of Kaiju Conversation Live. It is me, your host, Elijah Thomas, and joining me is the one and only Lizard King himself, Michael Hamilton.
Whoops, sorry. Hi, everybody.
So, we're back at it again for episode 7 of Kaiju Conversation Live, a monthly live stream show where we just talk. We just have a jolly good time. We don't have any like set discussion points. We're just here to chill and have a great time. In the chat we've got Samson West.
Samson!
Hello, Samson. And classic Michael.
Vintage Michael. Vintage. I prefer the word vintage because I am getting older, so vintage sounds better than classic, I guess. I don't know.
I think both have their qualities. Like, you would rather have a classic car than a vintage car.
This is true. I do own a classic car, FYI.
Very beautiful classic car,
I do. It is gorgeous. It was my dad's. So
here we go. And Eric says, of course, the alcoholic is drinking.
Oh, come on, Eric. This is apple juice.
It's apple juice. We here on Kaiju Conversation don't drink alcohol. Absolutely.
It's apple juice imported all the way from Scotland. It's Scottish apple juice.
I like that. I should try some. And we also got, I just meant classic, you sipping the moment it advanced to you. But you got to have an intro. When you're the Lizard King, you got to have an intro.
When you're the fucking Lizard King, you got to have an intro. That's right.
So, where do we even start? You've been on the podcast before. We've talked about your work on Kaiju Weekly and Kaiju Groupie and all the good stuff, and then we've had you on to argue with me about Godzilla versus Kong.
We're not doing that again. I feel like we're in a much friendlier place since that time has passed, and there has been a lot of time that's passed since the last time we've done this together.
Right. Yeah. Now we both know that I have the right opinion, and you have an opinion that may or may not be right.
I have an opinion that's incredibly popular with 99.999% of the fandom, and you have an opinion that just chafes people.
Well, it's funny you say that, and this might lead into our first topic here, but I've actually been hearing a lot of people as of late. The honeymoon phase of like Godzilla versus Kong is kind of getting over for a lot of people. I've noticed a lot of people have been
people would be wrong. Those people would be wrong. Those people would be wrong. Yes, they would. They would be wrong.
I think you're still in your honeymoon phase, Michael.
Okay, so realistically, I understand the complaints about Godzilla versus Kong, Elijah. Like, it's not a very good story.
Right.
It's not a very good story. Mainly, you come to Godzilla versus Kong for two things: Godzilla and Kong. Giant monkey, giant lizard, punchy. That's what you come for. To steal a phrase from someone who just entered the chat. That's exactly what you come for.
And somebody who has entered the chat, Mr. Nathan Marchand. Oh, the fight over GVK has already started.
No, there will be no fight. Elijah and I are on perfectly good terms. It's just he can't realize that I'm right and he's wrong. That's the problem.
It's just the fact that Michael's in denial of Godzilla versus Kong.
Or it could be that Elijah is trying to be such a hipster that he's just going to buck up against anything that's popular.
You know, I feel like that's litigation. I think that's litigation on your on your end.
I don't know if litigation is the correct word outside of just. I mean, is there a legal term for just somebody being wrong, like flat wrong,
Inaccurate?
Samson, throw hands, you bastards.
But no, so talking about fandom stuff, you and I, Michael, have been doing a lot of work in the fandom. We've been doing Kaiju Ramen together. We've been doing Kaiju Weekly. So,
right.
How has that? I mean, for me, I was actually just talking to Samson before this stream, and it's kind of, when you think about it, the fandom's changed a lot since you and I first came on the scene back in 2020.
It was earlier than that. It was like 2019. 2019 is when I came on.
So, Michael, out of curiosity, how has things changed for you? Not personally, how do you view the content that you enjoy now?
That's actually a really good question. So when I came into like fandom, air quotes fandom, because I've always been a fan. Like I've been a fan since 1994. But like I came into quote fandom, proper back in 2019, where I started getting involved. Like my first ever podcast was Kaiju Weekly with our friend Travis, when I randomly just sent they were asking for listener feedback. And so I sent him an email with 3 questions, and they read all 3 questions across 3 episodes. And, he asked me to come on the show because his co-host at the time was stepping away. The rest is history. Like it was supposed to be a temporary gig, and I'm still here 4 years later. But how my perspective of the media that I've watched has changed over the years is I've begun to appreciate some of the nuances of it. Like, being like hanging out with certain people in the fandom has made me analyze these films a little bit more, like think a little bit more deeply about them. It's like, to steal a phrase from someone who shall remain nameless, intellectual by osmosis. So that's sort of like how it's been for me. Like I've been able to not just, like before it was, oh, Godzilla, ooh, King Ghidorah, giant lizard, giant dragon, punchy. Like before it was just kind of like, it was silly fun. But now, like if you watch these films and if you watch the genre in general, now there's a lot you can pull out of it. So like when I'm trying to convince non-kaiju fans to enjoy kaiju movies, I usually lead with something similar to, it's very, the kaiju fandom and giant monster movies are similar to horror movies, where they sort of excise some anxieties of the culture at the time. So you look at Gojira in 1954, we all know that film was made after the atomic bombings, and all the trauma that happened then. So, and that's and you can pinpoint other little instances throughout history as well. Like 1950s B movies, or what we would call B movies, 1950s American monster movies, was our obsession with the atomic age, our obsession with the atomic bomb. But from the perspective of, like, from a very American perspective, and that's how I. When we view these films in those contexts, knowing like the social and socioeconomical and even political anxieties that were going on at the time, it makes these movies incredibly more interesting. And reading books like Dave Callett's book, some of John LeMay's works as well, Ed Godachevsky and others, like reading these books and studying the fandom and studying the genre alongside these kaiju intellectuals, air quotes, for the audio listener, has made my enjoyment of the genre that much more interesting.
Right. Now, even more so than that, because I agree with you. I thoroughly do. But one thing I know that you and I think some people misconstrued kind of our like that is more so than just that. I know, Michael, you and I have talked about how I specifically remember when Kaiju Weekly went through the change of being a podcast about movies and news to just news. You mentioned how enjoyable it was to just sit back and watch a movie and not have to like dive into that analytical aspect and just being able to enjoy this stuff like how you did in 1994 when you first, really indulged yourself in this content.
Right.
And I think that's something too that you and I both kind of share is just being able to remember a time when this was just, I mean, Samson kind of posted it here, just the punchy. And kind of that childlike innocence with these films as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a different thing when you're doing a film review podcast like Kaiju Weekly that has to be produced weekly, hence the name Kaiju Weekly. So I was sitting down and watching a movie once a week for review on top of the other stuff that I was trying to enjoy as well for fun and recreation. So, and not all the movies we covered on Kaiju Weekly during its first run of the show when I first came on, not all of those movies I enjoyed. Like some of those movies were a slog. Like, for example, and this is going to be this might be a little bit of a controversial take for some people, but I did not like Raiga, Monster of the Deep, or whatever that movie's called. I think it's called Raigo,
God of the Sea Monster.
God of the Sea Monsters.
King of the Sea Monsters. That's the title for that one.
That'll work. I didn't enjoy that one. I really didn't even, I didn't enjoy Howl from Beyond the Fog all that much either. It was just different. It was just different. And like, I remember my very first episode with Kaiju Weekly was episode 9. It was Frankenstein Conquers the World was my very first episode. And I labored. Oh, if you go back and listen to that episode, you can hear how nervous I am, first of all. Second of all, you can hear how I'm just like fire hosing information because people don't know this, but I watched that movie 8 times in preparation for that podcast because I didn't want to sound like an asshole the whole time. I didn't want to sound like an idiot, right? So it's definitely changed because, like I said, there are certain movies during that era of podcasting for me that I didn't quite enjoy. And so switching it from watching a movie by necessity to watching a movie for pleasure, because now we're only talking about the news, has been way more enjoyable for me because I view, in a lot of ways, talking about the news every week, just kind of shooting the shit with my friends, basically. That's how I view Kaiju Weekly now, as just sort of as a hobby, as I think that a lot of things in this fandom should be viewed as a hobby.
Right. Real quick, we've got Nathan saying I'm with Elijah. Michael has no taste in cinema. And we have Eric with you're talking about movies that literally have no budget and were made because they love the genre. So you should feel awful, Michael, for critiquing indie films.
I know. I should feel
And then we got Adrian in the chats.
Adrian! Yo, Adrian. I know he gets sick of that, but it's okay.
So, okay. Now, I kind of wanted to jump on something you brought up there. So I watch a lot of movies for Kaiju Conversation, right? And I've discovered a lot of movies that I actually really love. But even before that, just getting to watch and enjoy some of these movies has been really, really refreshing. Not needing a podcast or anything or like writing an article, just watching them. Michael, have you had any experiences like that? Like the podcast for me, we just posted today actually Parasite Part 1, a Takashi Yamazaki film. And when I first watched that about a month ago, not even like preparation for the podcast, but just in general, I loved it. Like, spoiler alert for the episode, I think it's an amazing movie. Have you had anything like that where you were, since Kaiju Weekly's transition from movies to news, have you had a movie that you've been able to watch that you just were floored by? I mean, it could be either kaiju, tokusatsu, or just in general. Just like, what has there been a movie?
It's easy. It's Oppenheimer. When I watched Oppenheimer, I thoroughly enjoyed. I went to the movies by myself on opening weekend. I think it was like a Saturday. I went to the movies by myself and watched it. I thoroughly enjoyed Oppenheimer. And the reason why I did is because I wasn't there to review it. We didn't have a live stream or anything I was committed to that evening to talk about it. I was strictly just there as a fan of movies and good movies, and contrary to what our friend Nathan would say, I do have good taste in movies. In fact, I have better taste in movies than he does to some degree. But Oppenheimer has been probably the movie that I have seen that has really floored me and blown me away. And it's really not even, it's really not fair to even call it, like, I've heard fans call, it's Godzilla adjacent, but like, okay, fine. It would be interesting to watch Oppenheimer side by side with something like -1 when -1 eventually comes out, right? So that would be I don't think it would work the same way with Oppenheimer and 54, although you could get there. You could watch Oppenheimer and Gojira back to back, and you could get there, but I think like it'll be more powerful to watch Oppenheimer and then -1 side by side, because they're so close. They're much closer together in terms of time.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So I would say Oppenheimer. Like, I don't. To be fair, like I've seen these movies and I've watched this genre so long. I'm a little bit jaded by everything. Right. So everything is predictable at this point, at least within like kaiju cinema. Like I haven't necessarily had a kaiju movie or a giant monster movie or whatever you want to call it. I haven't had one that's really like blown me away. Like Shin Godzilla never blew me away. Like it was okay. It was okay. I have my gripes with Shin, and before Adrian jumps in the chat and says, "Good Lord, Michael," as he does, I'm just gonna say I respect Shin. It's just not, I just don't value it as highly as a lot of other fans do.
Right. It's funny because you and I disagree on so much. I mean, in all honesty, we do.
We do.
But
yeah.
I think for Shin Godzilla, you and I both kind of have a similar agreement on it's okay. I remember going out of theaters hating it. I was like upset that I even went to see it in theaters. I was that upset with it when it came out. I've kind of warmed up.
Why did you get upset by it? I don't want to cut you off, but why did you get upset by it?
So I just didn't like the creative change that Hideaki Anno and Higuchi did. I wasn't a fan of the whole forms thing. I wasn't a fan. I mean, in theaters, and I've had people argue with me, but I've had confirmation. The theatrical print of the film had CGI that was not complete. There's stuff in the film that is not the same that it was on Blu-ray when we got it in the States.
Are you talking about Kamada-kun?
I'm talking about the whole film.
Okay.
The whole film had scenes in it that were not exactly how they were on disc. And I mean, you can even see that in the trailer. There's shots in the trailers that have been changed in the film. In the trailer, it looks more suit-like, whereas in the actual movie, it's very obviously it's very obvious it's a CGI model. But for me, it was I didn't like those creative changes, and I used to have this thing where modern day Japanese cinema was too modern, too different,
Too modern and too Japanese.
yeah. It's a weird. So since 2016, I've changed, obviously.
Yeah.
I've had, I mean, some of the
You don't wear
Japanese
the
movies,
you don't wear the mask anymore. That's what's changed.
yeah, right.
And the sombrero. You don't look like bootleg Monster Island buddies.
Budgeted Monster Island buddies.
Budgeted Monster Island buddies, right? To some degree, Monster Island buddies looks like. Never mind, forget it. I'm gonna back off of that.
I was still developing my understanding of cinema in 2016. I mean, that was 8 years ago.
Mhm.
So I mean, I was still pretty young. And it just, something interesting about Japanese cinema is the color grading is different than what you would see in modern day Hollywood films. It wasn't like, when I watch classic Toho era Godzilla, it feels normal. It feels like I could watch a Godzilla movie and then watch some monster movie from America, and there would be like a stylistic change, but the look would still be there, right? Does that make sense?
No, I know what I'm picking up on what you're saying. There's a texture to Japanese cinema. There's there's a grittiness to it. Like there's
Yes.
like Shin Godzilla is by all intents and purposes a fairly I would say polished, modern looking film.
Yes.
But there's still that like faint overlay of something like that grittiness that's laid on top of it. And if you watch especially if you're watching old Showa Godzilla movies, like there's definitely that grainy kind of dirtiness to it. Like I was flipping through not flipping through, but I turned on my TV and Pluto was still pulled up on my Apple TV, and it was playing Rodan. And so that like Rodan is a really kind of drab, brown, very warm toned movie. Like it's that grain. Yeah, like Samson just said, it's that grain, it's that grittiness, it's that dirty, like it's almost like there's dirt over top of there's like a dirty lens on the camera. You get that a lot with Sentai as well. By comparison, I don't know what they're doing differently, but by comparison, even Kamen Rider feels less gritty than Super Sentai.
Right. And I think modern Japanese cinema it's still kind of there, right? But it feels more polished. You look at the Japanese film industry, and it really got its boom in the late 40s, early 50s, and we had kind of the height of it in the 60s and 70s, and since then, like, it's been gradually developing. And in those 80s and 90s, like, one thing I love about the 80s and 90s is the grungy stuff that came out of just in general in that time period. When I think of an 80s action movie, I think of a darkly lit scene where there's a yellow light and you see like half of the hero's face and the other half you can kind of see, and it's really sweaty and texturized, and it's just
there's
grungy.
a sharpness to it.
Yes.
Like it's almost like I'm not a film. I don't do film. Like, you're the filmographer. I'm just the graphic designer. But it's almost like they've dialed, like, talking about like just photo editing and photo retouching. It's almost like they've dialed up the sharpness to a photo in sort of like that genre of film, because you see those little imperfections in those movies.
And I think part of it too is just the contrast between shooting on film and shooting on digital. Because shooting on digital is completely different. Oppenheimer was shot on 70 millimeter IMAX cameras, 70 millimeter IMAX cameras. It was shot with film. It wasn't shot digitally like your typical Hollywood blockbuster. And that's just something Nolan does, is he films with actual film stock. Quentin Tarantino does the same thing. And it's one of those things that I think it's obvious when you see a difference there, right? Godzilla Final Wars at one point was the most stylistically different Godzilla movie. I'd say Shin has since taken that. But Final Wars was the first Godzilla movie filmed on a digital camera.
And you can tell.
And yes, you can tell, like it was the first of its kind. But it still used traditional effects, right? It still used the typical stuff you would find in a Toho film.
Right.
Whereas once you got to Shin Godzilla, so much time had passed that the industry had changed drastically, right? Like it was completely different. And I guess for me it was just that shock of seeing a modern day Japanese film with this like HD 4K video with CGI that was unfinished and the Ono-isms of the angles and whatnot. I mean, since 2016, I've watched more modern day Japanese films. I mean, I just talked about Parasite that had a sequel. You have other Yamazaki films and other Ono films. I will continue to say that Shin Kamen Rider is the best out of the Shin films. Which I will continue to argue that, even though some people will say that it's the worst. I highly disagree with them. But since 2016, I've kind of warmed up to modern day Japanese cinema. It's a more developed Japanese style, I would say. Something you would find in a lot of kind of artsy films. Kind of the what was once artsy is becoming more mainstream. The way to do it. Yeah. Which is perfectly fine. Like that's how it should be. The people who go out and do different things and weird things and it clicks becomes what is the norm. And it just Shin Godzilla just didn't work for me in that standpoint. But like I said, since then I've kind of understood and watched more cinema and whatnot, and I haven't watched it in probably 5 years, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, it just no shade, not trying to throw shade at it, but it did just turn 7. Yeah, it just turned 7 recently. Yeah.
So I need to rewatch it. I'd love to see from watching Shin Ultraman and Shin Kamen Rider and even Evangelion, being able to see that stuff. And now going back to watch Shin Godzilla, I think I might like it a little more, but it will never, it's never gonna hit. I mean, I have so many gripes with the film that it'll never grace my top 10.
I mean, I'm yet to watch Shin Kamen Rider. I've watched Shin Ultraman, Shin Godzilla. I've watched a little bit of Evangelion, but that show is incredibly too depressing for my taste. But I'm yet to watch Shin Kamen Rider and see how they all kind of overlap. I have heard that Shin Kamen Rider is probably the weakest of the Shiniverse. Shiniverse sounds weird, but we're gonna
Japan. It's called the Shin Japan
Heroes, I think.
Universe. Yeah. See, I think I don't understand that complaint, because Shin Kamen Rider is basically Shin Ultraman, same concept.
Yeah,
taking a bunch of episodes of the original show and throwing them together,
mashing them together, right?
Almost like a compilation film.
Right.
I think Shin Ultraman suffers from having the same story twice, with Mephiles and Zeiram.
Yeah, I do. I can see that. Yeah,
but Shin Kamen Rider doesn't do that. Shin Kamen Rider makes it different each time. And I enjoyed the style. Like it was an Anno movie, and it was the first time I had felt like Anno had done a full movie. One complaint I have from watching Cutie Honey and Shin Godzilla and Shin Ultraman, which he wrote and ghost directed, if we're going to be perfectly honest, and even Evangelion and the end of Evangelion, Anno can't do endings. I think he sucks at endings. I think they're awful. Like I genuinely believe Anno cannot figure out how he wants to end a movie because he's so indecisive that he does it in a way that it could continue. Because that's what Cutie Honey does. That's what Shin Godzilla does. That's what Shin Ultraman does. That's what Evangelion's ending, granted that was due to budgetary reasons, but it was so awful that he had to redo the ending, and then the ending we got was so crazy that he had to redo them again in a 4 movie franchise. Like, Anno has redone Evangelion 3 times now.
What kind of pisses me off about, well, specifically Shin Godzilla, what pisses me off about it is the ending where this is my personal opinion, I feel like he left it so obviously, he obviously sequel baited, but with no intention of actually doing a sequel.
Right, exactly. Catching up in the comments here, Eric says, I still can't explain my feelings of Shin Kamen Rider. It was my first ever Kamen Rider anything I had seen, and it destroys my brain. See, same here. It was my first Kamen Rider property, period. And for me, I enjoyed it. I thought it was very enjoyable, and I really enjoyed because Rex and I covered Shin Kamen Rider on the podcast. Rex has watched a handful of the shows and movies, and so I really enjoyed getting to be explained to what everything meant. And it, for me at least, it helped grasp what Shin Kamen Rider was doing.
I've watched some of the original Kamen Rider. I've watched some of the original series because I was following along for a short period of time. I was following along with Nathan and Travis when they were doing Henshin Men together. So I've watched a little bit of that. I've watched some Kamen Rider Black. I haven't watched Black RX yet. My copy is pre-ordered. So I was going to wait till I got it on physical. So I have enjoyed Kamen Rider Black. I will say that. I have watched a little bit of Double. And Double, whatever. Yeah, Double. It's Travis's favorite one. Kamen Rider Double, and then I've watched. I finished Ryuki.
Okay.
I finished Ryuki, and I watched a little bit of Kuga too. I forget about that. I watched a little bit of Kuga, because it's also on Tubi. Because after I watched a little bit of Black, Travis recommended I go back and watch Kuga because Kuga is a similar vibe to it. It's very kind of darker and gritty.
Right. So clearly you know more about Kamen Rider than I do.
I don't know shit about Kamen Rider. I just know.
Well, you've seen more. You could talk more than I could.
Yeah, I could talk more, but like I could also BS more about Kamen Rider too.
This is true. Nathan says, maybe Elijah, but the narrative in Shin Masked Rider is a mess. Well, you're a mess for calling it Masked Rider. You should know better, Nathan. You should know better.
Now, children.
Eric says, I had the feeling that because I didn't see anything previously, I was going to miss a lot of things, but I was told that I would be fine, and I feel like I missed so much. And that's the thing, Eric. There are moments where you miss things. Because I missed things. There was a few things I knew. I know during the production of Kamen Rider 71, the main actor of Hongo, who also played Kamen Rider, and I knew that while filming, like 13 episodes into filming, he broke his legs. So in the movie, when spoiler alert, Michael. In the movie, when Kamen Rider's legs are broken, I got that reference. I chuckled at that because I knew that happened. But I had to have some background knowledge of Kamen Rider to know that, right? Mm-hmm. So it's one of those things where it would help to have that background. but honestly, Rex like saved it all for me because Rex got to tell me how, because he has seen Kamen Rider, he's watched a lot of the shows. I think he's watching Ryuki right now. He like was able to in the 2.5 hour episode we did, he got to explain what things meant. And when I had questions, I was like, Rex, why is this? Why are they Ogs? Like what makes them an Og? What is dark and whatnot? Or it's not dark, it's shocker. I was thinking of Kikaida. And being able to watch Kikaida helped me understand the Toei stereotypes.
Sensibilities.
Yes.
The tropes.
So being able to watch Kikaida with my little knowledge of how Kamen Rider worked, and then seeing Shin Kamen Rider, and then Rex explaining it to me, I feel like I got a better experience with Shin Kamen Rider because I knew a little bit more of what I was getting into.
Right. So that's what I had always heard too about Shin Kamen Rider is you don't have to have an extensive knowledge of the genre or the franchise to understand what's going on. But between you and a couple other people I've talked to, it doesn't hurt you, but it does help you if you do have some working knowledge of the franchise. Yes,
I would agree. Samson's here saying he's heading out to stream on Twitch. Have a great night. Look forward to having more fun with y'all in the near future. Bye, Samson. We got to get you on here one of these days. And Nathan's excuse is he's driving and using his voice transcriber and he doesn't want to die. Well, I don't want you to die either, Nathan, but it's Shin Kamen Rider.
Right.
But you know, I would recommend Shin Kamen Rider to anybody, but I would also say you have to maybe read an article or two on Kamen Rider, or just watch the original show, to be honest. Like maybe that would be a little bit better, and then have somebody explain to you the handful of questions you have.
Was it issue, for those who have a copy of the magazine, was it issue 5? Was it issue 5 that had the article that Travis wrote on Kamen Rider? Or was it some?
Yes, issue 5 was Henshin styled.
Yeah, that's right, because it was Lisa Nafziger did the cover art for us. Okay, that's right. But there's an article, I believe. I'd have to pull my copy to make sure, but if I'm remembering it correctly, there is an article that kind of talks about the history or like maybe even the thematics of Kamen Rider. So it kind of, if you have a copy, if you're listening to this later and you have a copy of issue 5 of Kaiju magazine, go back and read that article, and you might have it might give you a little bit more insight of what you're dealing with.
So going here, Eric says he's been lied to.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I've tried not to lie to you, buddy. I don't know what you're talking about.
I think he's talking about Shin Kamen Rider and how he didn't have to watch anything or know anything going in.
That's probably true. And I may have been I may have been the one that has told him that. I don't remember. If I was, I apologize.
We got in the chat, married to Kaiju. Hey, Joe.
Hey, nipples. Elijah, you know all about nipples, don't you?
This is my Yeti nipple.
That is your very long. That's your very long Yeti nipple. That's like a.
It's kind of droopy too, to be honest.
It's one of them ape hangers. It's like one of them like droopy, orangutan nipples. You know.
Oh no. Oh, that's funny. So, you know, and we just got confirmation. I'm correct. And Michael, you are the one that lied to Eric. How dare you?
I'm sorry. I don't mean to lie to people, but sometimes it happens.
So, I mean, we've been talking a little bit about movies, but I also want to bring up, so there's something different about your setup here. You have some beautiful posters in the background there.
Oh yeah, I do, don't I?
What can you tell me what you've got back there?
Yeah, sure. So all of these are done by the very talented Tom Whalen. That one on the far, that would be, if it was, that one on the far side there, that is Godzilla versus Hedorah. This is Mothra versus Godzilla, one of the best movies in the franchise, hands down. And then this one is the newest one from Ghost X Ghost, also by Tom Whalen, Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, or Ghidra the Three-Headed Monster. I also have one of his Biollante posters in front of me, but you can't see that. So yes, I'm a collector of art. I am a collector of the art.
So I want to talk about that a bit, but did you say that Godzilla versus Mothra is one of the best Godzilla movies made?
Mothra versus Godzilla is one of the best movies ever made. Yes.
I highly disagree with you, sir.
Oh, I don't like this. Oh, I'm getting sweaty in places. Why? Okay, so but why do you not believe that Mothra versus Godzilla, which is arguably like one of the most classic, one of the most beloved Godzilla movies of all time, why do you not believe that it's one of the best?
So real quick, Joe said, I thought I heard that wrong opinion come from Michael as well as Elijah. And Adrian's asking what the hell. So, okay. I've read, I had to do a podcast on Mothra versus Godzilla, right? And in all of my research, people praised the movie. It is like, I would be ignorant if I didn't say that it is very well loved. It has been hailed as the second best in the Showa era behind 54 for most cinephiles. It's been praised and it's been loved, right?
I would say that title more rightly belongs to Monster Zero, but that's just my opinion.
I see Monster Zero up there as well. The three that get most love is 54, Mothra versus, and Monster Zero. Now, that being said, I have always had this thing, like from my first viewing to now. Mothra versus Godzilla is a fun movie until the second final fight. I've always found that the last 30 minutes of the movie are very boring. I have always not liked the follow-up fight to the adult Mothra fight. And that's not because Mothra wins. I'm fine with Godzilla losing. Like, Godzilla losing is not something that I like hate when I see that.
Right. When it's appropriate.
When it's appropriate, and I've heard people say they don't like the movie because of that, and I disagree, but
I feel like that's a petty reason to dislike it. That's not a very substantive excuse to dislike the film.
But for me, the writing has always, like, after that fight, everything comes to a screeching halt. Mm-hmm. And the rest of it is just kind of trying to get to the scene where the babies, like, beat Godzilla. And even then, I'm like, I'm bored.
The film definitely slows down. Like, if I'm being honest, I always try to be as intellectually honest as I can. Regardless of how I feel about the film personally, I love it, but it does slow down the moment they get to the island to talk to the to talk to the chief and the fairies, to talk to the Shobijin, to plead with them to allow Mothra. Well, yeah, to allow Mothra to come and fight Godzilla. It drags there, and then after the fight with the adult Mothra, after she dies, it drags a little bit thereafter as well, because at that point, all you're really doing is trying to get the fairies away from the corrupt businessman. And then you've got some other shenanigans going on. You've got some cutscenes of Godzilla fighting the military, which is always nice. It's always great to see Godzilla on screen. But the fight between Godzilla and the two larvae, it's not the greatest thing in the franchise. I feel like the fight, although shorter, and I think it's runtime is a lot shorter. The fight between the Ghidorah, Mothra, and Rodan and Godzilla was way more entertaining than in Mothra versus Godzilla.
And what I appreciate about the Ghidorah scene, the final fight, is it starts off with your monsters being reluctant to fight, right?
Mhm.
And then Mothra goes and does it herself, and you see her just get destroyed. And it's thanks to the score. But the moment Godzilla comes charging down the mountain, when I saw that in theaters, that was my first Toho Godzilla movie from the Showa era I saw in theaters. When I saw that, I felt what Honda meant for everybody to feel. And it's that like relief and that excitement, like Godzilla's coming to save the day. Let's go. And from there, you have Rodan's introduction, and then that whole fight. It's chaos, but it's fun. And you have the people watching from afar as the monsters are fighting, and you have the stakes of the entire world because Ghidorah destroyed Venus or Mars, depending on
whichever version you watch. Yeah.
But the fact that Ghidorah did that, like, Godzilla's not going to destroy the world, right?
Right.
Like
right.
that was established in King Kong versus, and then Raids Again in 54. So the stakes aren't as high, but in Ghidorah, that was the first like world-ending like fear. And I loved how they did that. And I think I love the characters in that one. I think they're all memorable. They all have moments to shine. Whereas in Mothra versus Godzilla, and I believe Mothra versus was written. Was that a Sekizawa script or was that a Kimura script?
That's a good question. I actually do not know. I think it was a Sekizawa script, but I'm actually not 100% sure. I guess I'm a fake fan for not remembering that right off. Let's
checking. Okay, it was a Sekizawa script. It was.
Yes.
But I feel like Sekizawa like did a better job at the writing in Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, which was his follow-up in terms of kaiju films from that era.
The social commentary in Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster is more interesting than in Mothra versus Godzilla, because in Mothra versus Godzilla, it's just your usual greedy businessman wants to profit off of the backs of the innocent Shobijin and Mothra and all of that. I feel like it's a pretty one-note, one-dimensional story, whereas in Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, you've got just a lot going on. You've got Princess Salno losing her memory, you are becoming, quote, an alien from Venus, or the prophetess from Venus, or prophetess from Mars, whichever version you watch. And then you've got them working to figure out, like, they know who she is, and they're trying to bring her back to reality. And during this whole time, you've got the prophecies, you've got her seeing premonitions, you've got the new character in Ghidorah coming, this new threat from space. You
also have the threat from Earth, the assassins too.
The assassins, yes.
And all of that really creates this nice story of like both sides, the kaiju and the human sides, both have their issues, their impending issues.
Well, this is the first time we would see Godzilla actually like have a conversation or appear to have a conversation. So that in that moment, that is Godzilla's transitionary moment from villain to hero in Ghidorah Three-Headed Monster. Like, because they anthropomorphize Godzilla during that conversation between him, Rodan, and the Mothra larva.
And I don't know, I've always been, I like the sci-fi in my Godzilla stuff. I do. I love the inclusion of science fiction elements. And Ghidorah's got aliens, Ghidorah's got, ESP, Ghidorah has, giant monsters in general. Mothra versus Godzilla's a little more tame, a little more fantastic, a little more fantasy based with Mothra and the Shobijin and whatnot. So Mothra versus Godzilla's always been a little less exciting for me, I guess, is what it boils down to. It's been a little less exciting and a little more dire and a little more dull. but like I said, it's hailed as one of the greatest Godzilla films of all time. So I would be ignorant to say that that's not the viewpoint for a lot of people. And I fully acknowledge I'm on the lesser side of the opinion. For once, I'm on the minority side of these.
Oh, you definitely are, at least for this one. At least for, like, I can agree with you about our gripes with something like Shin. I'm kind of I'm on the lesser end of the fandom when I say that I don't necessarily appreciate 54 as much as some fans would say I should.
Right. Now, this all started because we were talking about your artwork. So,
okay, yeah, true.
Michael, you have an amazing collection. And I would like to...
It's good. I mean, I've got there are people that we know like Joe and Eric that have much more impressive collections than I do.
But yours, I mean, I still like when we first started talking, I didn't know like what kind of collector you were. Now, you collect mostly X Plus, correct?
I collect, yeah, I mean, it's like the first few years of my collecting habit, addiction, what have you, obsession. I'm seeing a therapist for obsession. No, not really. That part started, I would say, in like 2018 is when I was like became a really serious, like, I'm gonna spend serious money on like these figures. Essentially, they're statues. They're like 12-inch tall statues, right? So yes, it's mainly X Plus. I've gotten into some Sofubi. I've got some Bandai's still left over, SH Monster Arts, just some odds and ends here that I picked up. Is like I'm not necessarily the everything collector like our friend Joe is, but I do like different things within collecting. I don't just strictly stick with X Plus. I don't just strictly stick with Sofubi. I don't just strictly stick with one area of collecting. If it appeals to me and it speaks to me, then I will grab it.
Right. So why, like, what joy do you get out of collecting? Out of like, for me, it's the thrill of the hunt. And
that's a good question.
Like, what do you enjoy? Like, what made you buy the poster art behind you, or the X Pluses, or the Sofubi, or the Bandai, or the SHMA? Like, what?
Oh man, on a practical perspective, the reason why I'm an X Plus collector is because of Leslie Chambers.
Okay.
Guys like Leslie Chambers and Rich Iso, who are both prolific collectors and very well known within our genre for collecting like very beautiful pieces, and they've been around for a long time. I got my first X Plus after a video. I got my very first X Plus, which was the 25 centimeter 1965 Godzilla from Monster Zero, because of a review that I watched from Leslie Chambers. So what makes me want to collect things is really, if Nathan is still here, the nostalgia of it, right? And just being able to growing up, my parents didn't have a whole lot of money, so there were things growing up that I really wanted, right, as a kid. Like, yeah, I wanted like all the awesome Trendmasters Godzilla toys. I still have some. But I couldn't get everything because my parents just couldn't afford it. I was too young to have a job, etc. So as I got older and I got like big boy money, then I started collecting and buying the things that I like. But I think what keeps me coming back to, collecting is, one, the thrill of the hunt. Like, there are certain things that are just they're grail pieces for you or for me, that I'm hunting for currently. The beauty and the art form of the sculpts and the paint application, specifically with Sofubi. Like, for instance, I have the Mondo Space Godzilla on my desk here. Like, this is a beautiful figure. This is a beautiful figure. Right. It's a beautiful figure. It is a beautifully painted figure. It is a it's a piece of art. Like, this is a piece of art. This is not a toy, even though it looks like a Trendmasters Godzilla, Space Godzilla. It is not a toy. This is a piece of art. And as someone who appreciates art, I think that's what attracts me to things like Sofubi, because they are in a lot of ways, they are very stylized, and they come with these really interesting paint applications that are gorgeous. And there's a lot of time spent, making the vinyl molds and crafting them to the designer or the creators specifications of how they want to represent the character. Mm-hmm. So Sofubi is an art form. Now, as a fan of these movies and this genre, I also want that physical representation of the things that I love. So that's why I collect X Plus, because they're accurate. They're screen accurate, right? Mm-hmm. So that's, I want a 19 set. I love Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla from 74. So that's why I bought the gigantic Mechagodzilla, because I wanted a huge Mechagodzilla in my collection, because I love that movie so dearly, and I want that physical thing with me at all times. Now, I mean, I'm not a hoarder, but some who have walked into this room, this is my office, this is my workspace. Some who have walked into this room that don't understand kind of that mindset of collecting and how that works, would probably call me a hoarder and would call me ridiculous for collecting what has been called by people. I had a friend of mine who didn't know I was into this stuff. He came in here, and he was over. He came over for dinner, and he brought his girlfriend over, and they both kind of walked into the office, and I was still working. And when I got here, and they walked in here, and they're like, "Oh, so you like dinosaurs?" Like, so I mean, I can't argue with that logic, right? You can't really, there's no way of arguing that logic without, sounding like an asshole, like a pretentious asshole. But so I just smiled and I said, "Yeah, I like dinosaurs." They're like, "Okay, cool. Are you almost ready so we can eat?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm almost ready so we can eat." But it also serves as a kind of a conversation starter. So, for instance, when I brought a girl over, the girl that I was dating at the time, when she came over, like, she grew up with this stuff. Like, her dad was big into it, and she knew of like Godzilla and Rodan and all the characters from her childhood. So when she came over, she was, impressed that, that someone would possess these things. She thought it was a little silly to spend the kind of money that I do on them, but she was interested nonetheless. I wouldn't say that Godzilla made me more interesting, but at least it added a layer of uniqueness to my personality, because it's like, everyone, especially where I live, it's like, "Oh, you're into hunting and fishing." Well, everybody's into hunting and fishing. "Oh, you're into football." Everybody's into football. It feels like everyone loves football. Like, that's really generic, I feel like. And if anyone watching, I'm sure there's a lot of football fans out there. But finding something like collecting Godzilla and collecting Kaiju and Sofubi and all these things that we enjoy, it does add a layer of uniqueness to our personalities. And so that's one of the reasons why I like having my collection. I like showing off my collection, because I feel like that is just an extra layer of uniqueness to me and my personality.
Right. And, I've kind of had similar experiences. I've only had like one person that I was with walk into my room, and when he did, he stopped. And he kind of looked around and was like, "Huh, that's a lot." And then somebody else walked in, and I guess she had a similar response. I wasn't there at the time, so I didn't know that had happened. But nonetheless, I've had similar experiences where people will walk in and they just kind of like take it all in for a second, because I mean, a lot of people, this is on me, but a lot of people don't know that I collect. Nobody can tell by this. This setup shows nothing about my collecting. But I've posted a little bit out there, and I have more than probably I should. I have no space really now to really collect, which has kind of slowed down my collecting. In recent
Because you
years.
you have 50 DVDs or 50 versions of Godzilla 98 in your room.
Pretty much. No, I have 2 rooms of stuff. I have 2 full rooms of stuff that I like when I move, it's gonna be awful because
Oh yeah, it's gonna be awful.
I have no idea how I'm gonna move everything. Like,
Right.
it's been a
So
journey.
so let me ask you, because that brings up a really interesting question, and I think it's an interesting part of, at least being in. I think it's an interesting part of being in fandom in general, but like
Mhm.
being a part of a fandom that's as niche as ours, it's extra intriguing to ask this. Like, why don't you share your love of Godzilla with more people?
So I okay. So the reason first, let's break this down, right? So I don't share my collection mostly because I don't like the idea of people knowing what I have. I'm believe it or not, I'm kind of a private person in a lot of aspects of my life. When it comes to what I own, I try to keep that on the DL just because I like having that, I guess, security, knowing that nobody's going to know that I have this super ultra rare whatever and they're going to want it, and they know how much it's worth. I'm not saying I have anything like that, but like if I did, like I wouldn't
Nudge, nudge,
want.
wink, wink.
So that's part of it, it's my private life, and I don't like broadcasting my private life. Another part of it too is a lot of people know me. Like at work, one of my bosses guessed my password on my phone because she was like, okay, so you like this stuff, so and she guessed it. Like within 2 minutes, she guessed my password. And I was kind of, people know what I like. Like when you create content, when you watch content, when you wear content, like I'm wearing a Godzilla shirt right now. When you like buy this stuff, it's hard to hide that, right? When you're kind of as crazy as I am, it's hard to hide what you love. I mean, if you're a football fan, you're gonna wear a team shirt, right? Like you're gonna wear a jersey on the day that they're playing or whatever. Like you're gonna do that.
Right.
For me, it's that I create content and I do all this, and all of that just leads to me being like, people know what I like. At my old job, I was known as the Godzilla guy. For a lot of people, like I'm the Godzilla guy. And I've just come to accept that for a lot of people, that is me. In school, everybody knew me as the weird Godzilla kid. Which I mean, I think that's, I mean,
Guilty.
Yeah.
I was the weird Power Ranger kid, but that's the same thing.
But even to that point, I think, I mean, you and I have had so many conversations about life. Like we've talked about some pretty deep stuff, and I think there's also a level of learning more about somebody. Like there's more than just fandom, right? There's more than just this one thing we love. And
yeah, you and I have had conversations about people who this is all they are.
right.
Right. For example, I was having a conversation with somebody before I logged on for the stream tonight, and she shared with me a certain band that she loves, and she does not seem like the type of person that would love this band at all. And it
Mhm.
was a little bit like, oh, okay, so you like this, like you really, really like this, okay. And I was a little bit struck by it, and I feel like, and it got me thinking. It's like, oh, that's probably how people perceive me, because I have been said, like, I've had people in fandom say, oh, you don't look like you should be a Godzilla fan.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Like, you don't
And-
look like, and it just begs the question, like, okay, what does a Godzilla fan look like?
Right. And it's funny because just today, one thing that a lot of people don't know is I like K-pop. I mean, you can make the jokes you want, but I like K-pop.
I won't.
But nobody would put that with me. Like, absolutely nobody would say, "Oh, you like K-pop. You listen to a little BTS." Nobody would expect that. I don't broadcast that. I mean, I just did, I guess. So I guess I'm screwed now, but we all have things we like. And I think there's another layer. Donnie, our mutual friend Donnie Winter, him and I, when I got to interview him for the upcoming issue of Kaiju Ramen at the end when we were off recording, I brought up that I like The Weeknd. I love The Weeknd.
Yeah.
And Donnie said, I love The Weeknd too. And then we had a conversation about The Weeknd, and it wasn't just like, oh, I love Can't Feel My Face in the Hills. Like, it was like, oh, this song off of My Dear Melancholy, or this song off of Starboy that's not Starboy. Being able to have conversations about stuff that's more than just the basics. Now, my favorite song by The Weeknd is The Hills. Like, if I'm listening to The Weeknd, it's probably going to be that song. Or, Blinding Lights is good, but, there's more to it than just Blinding Lights. Everybody knows Blinding Lights. But just being able to have that conversation is nice. And it's even cooler when people that, like Godzilla, can have conversations about other things they like. You and Nathan have a podcast about Power Rangers. Now, that's kaiju adjacent. I mean, it has kaiju in it, but it's not necessarily Godzilla. Like, we've brought up how Power Rangers isn't really repped at G-Fest, but you guys still talk
to
about
some degree. Neither is Ultraman, really. Like,
right.
Henshin heroes in general aren't. I noticed, because this past year was my very first G-Fest. I noticed that there wasn't a ton of like Henshin hero representation. It was all Godzilla or some very much dead center kaiju thing,
Right.
Dead center of the bullseye with the genre, right? But yeah, I mean, it's like, people, when I tell people that I'm into this, or I show people my collection, I remember I brought my friends over. It was right before we left for G-Fest, and I brought my friends over so they could get my key, my spare house key, because they were going to come by and feed my cats and make sure check on the place, because I live in an apartment complex, and sometimes I'm a little sus of my neighbors, and so I wanted somebody to come by every day and check on my place, make sure everybody was good. And I brought them into my room, and they had their little boy with them, Zeke. They had their little boy with them. And I think Zeke is, I want to say he just turned six-ish, I think. And he just comes in here and his eyes light up. Like, his eyes just light up because he loves Godzilla. He loves dinosaurs. He loves Jurassic Park. So his eyes just instantly light up. He's like, Ghidorah, Mothra, Godzilla. that kind of stuff is really like that did my heart happy, right? That's what it's about. And so before they left here, I had a spare Playmates Godzilla, one of the translucent ones with the translucent spines, not the one that shoots the heat ray, like the shooting heat ray.
Are you talking about the Hong Kong battle one? Or
the Hong Kong, yeah, the Hong Kong battle one. That's what it was. The Hong Kong battle one. Yeah, it was from Godzilla versus Kong. It wasn't like King of the Monsters. So I gave him that, and it's like I went over to their house the other day for dinner, and he comes running out of his room. He says, "Michael, look!" And he still has that Godzilla in his hand, and that was wonderful. It did my heart good. But his parents come in here, like Matt and Brittany come in here, and they're like, "Okay." Like this is a thing. Okay. And that's all his wife could say was okay. And she just starts laughing, but not in like a ha 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 nerd kind of way. But it's like I've never seen stuff like this before. I never knew, because you wouldn't know, looking at my apartment, looking at the rest of where I live, you wouldn't know that I was into this stuff, because I keep it very contained in this one space, because I want the rest of my house to be very accessible to my friends, my family, and other people. When people come over here, I want the whole house to be very accessible to them and just be very comfortable and very homey. But this office where my stuff is, this is my sanctuary. Like this is my place, right? So when people come in here, it's a shock, because they're going from like bachelor pad, like leather couches, and like the normal things that you would see in a normal person's house, and they're coming into this one room filled with Godzilla shit. So, it's interesting to see people's reaction.
Right. And, it is kind of nice to have those reactions, right? It's entertaining.
Sometimes it's good to have those reactions. Like I've had reactions go really off the rails. Back when I first moved, and I moved into my apartment, I started dating, because I'm divorced. I was divorced, and I was starting to date again. And, I brought girls over to the apartment, and they wanted to see my place. And I was always really nervous about showing them this room. Right. Mm-hmm. Like if I'm being completely and utterly transparent here, I was always really nervous about showing them this room, because you never know how people are going to react. Because sometimes it was, oh, this is okay. I'm okay with this. This is just who you are. That's fine. No judgment here. We don't kink shame here or whatever. No judgment here to, you're a fucking weirdo. I had a girl tell me, like, you're a fucking child. You're a weirdo. Like I've had people, I've had the whole thing. Like, oh wow. Okay. That's cool, whatever. And it's obviously not going to work out. You were great, but it is what it is. It is what it is. So I don't know. I always get a little nervous.
Right.
About showing them the collection, about showing the normies, as I call them, showing the normies the collection, because it could go a number of different ways. But it's really ultimately about just being yourself. And I think that's what fandom and interacting with all this stuff is mainly about, is just being yourself. Right.
Right. Real quick, Eric said, same buddy. I didn't show Carrie my Godzilla room for the first 2 to 3 months.
She thought it was a sex dungeon. Oh boy. Because I'm assuming, Eric, your door always stayed closed when people came over, and when people wanted to see it, and when people wanted the tour, right? Because they always want a tour. It's like, oh, show me around your place. Like this is always either the last place you take them, or it's like you don't take it, or you just say things, or I would just normally say, oh, that's my office. It's super boring. We don't have to go in there.
Right.
And usually, unless they're super nosy, they'll say, okay, that's cool. But I often wonder, like the people that I've said that to is like, oh, that's just my office. It's super boring. I often wonder if they think that, oh, is he like hiding a dead body in there? Or why is he being so secretive? I don't know. Which I'm not hiding a dead, just for the sake of YouTube. I'm not hiding a dead body anywhere. Just letting you know.
Good to
FYI.
know. Good to
It's
know.
Good to know. Good to know.
See, for me, I guess, so in case it's not a little obvious, I kind of have a lot. If we're talking just physical media, I have a lot. I have movies that I think if people saw what kind of movies I had, I don't hide it. When people say like, what kind of movie,
kind
like,
of-
what did you watch? And I say, well, today I watched the 2009 movie Sexy Rangers. You know, people
is-
kind of,
which is surprisingly underwhelming for what I was expecting.
and you're welcome for me introducing you to that one. So like when people ask, I'm a very dead honest person. There's things that I've done and things I've said where people are like, and you're being completely honest right now. Like, you literally have that. You literally watch that. You're literally telling me the plot to this movie.
Do you ever share with them peak cinema?
I have talked about Tetsuo the Iron Man a little bit, but okay. So with Tetsuo the Iron Man, the moment you say there's a scene where a guy creates a drill that's his penis, that creates a lot of questions. So I've learned to be very careful with certain movies on what I do and how I explain and describe stuff. And so for me, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, it's so like I've invested so much into this, and there was this one time, there's this friend of mine, she hated the nights where I would be up at 5 a.m. and not go to bed. She told me that she didn't like that and she wished that I didn't do that. And I was like, look, I'm podcasting. Rex lives in Australia. Like, I have to do this. Like, our schedule, this is what we do. And she never could really get past the fact that, like, I had a lot of nights where I was up really, really late, and it was just something that she just couldn't grasp. And, you know, it's something that I get it. Like, you're concerned and all, but there's also that level of like, this is what I do, right? Like, this is what I like. This is what I do. And I'm going to do it, right? Like, that's one thing I'm very, very adamant on with everybody is like, I'm not going to change. Like, I love this stuff. Like, if we're going to like talk about like, I mean, there's certain things, obviously, like we can all change, we can all improve ourselves, right? But you also have to know, like, what are some things that you have to, like, that is truly yourself, right? That stuff, like, knowing who you are is important. Eric says, or when Magui with the kid pissing in his head, peak cinema. Yeah, but like, that's the fun stuff, right? Like, the fact that we can sit here and laugh at that, like, normies, as we're gonna call them, would not. They would look at that and say, "What are you watching?" Like,
they would
what
think
is
you're a
this?
psycho. Like, a lot of if people walked in on me watching, I don't know. I'm trying to think of something like super weird that I've watched recently.
You don't watch weird stuff.
I don't watch a lot of weird stuff. You're right. I don't. Okay. So if someone walked in and watched and saw me watching Galaxy of Terror, right?
Okay.
So if someone walked in on me watching Galaxy of Terror during the infamous scene, right? They would probably think I was a psychopath.
Right.
Or a pervert. Or both.
Probably both.
Probably both.
And see, like, I mean, we both know what kind of movies and all the stuff I have. Like, that's not something that you just, you know, you can watch. Or even my books. I have like books that are in complete Japanese, right? And there's people that they'll see that you have Japanese books and they're like, can you even speak that? And you say, no, but I translate it and read it, or the pictures are cool. And there will be people that look at you that are kind of weird. I actually just bought today, there's a sequel novel to Matango called Matango The Last Counterattack. And I actually just ordered that off Amazon today, and it's going to be here in a couple of weeks. But I don't know it, but I'm like, you know what? I'd love to own the sequel to Matango. And eventually there will be somebody who sees that book and then says, why do you have a Japanese book with mushrooms? Is this a Japanese book on mushrooms? And I say, nope. It's the sequel book to a 1962 movie about mushrooms that take over your body and transform you into a giant mushroom. They're going to look at me and say, were you on some mushrooms? Like, what is this?
I mean,
like, were they on mushrooms?
Not recently, but you know. But no, you're right. I was having, like, the other day I was having a conversation with someone, and she said we were just talking about books and things that we like, and she says, "Oh, do you read?" I said, "What do you like?" I read, and I read, and we both read, and just for pleasure. And she asked me what kind of books I like, and I'm like, I was like, "Oh, I'll read a little bit." I sent her 20,000 Leagues Into the Sea, which is one of my favorite books. I sent her The Four Loves by C.S. Lewis, which is a book about relationships and the psychology of relationships. And then I sent her a book by Seth Godin, which is more of like a businessy, kind of more entrepreneurial leadership type book. And so I kind of sent that as a kind of a smattering of, oh, these are the type of things that I read. Right. This is not everything, but this is something. It's like, she's like, oh, yeah, I can't get into sci-fi. It's too weird for me. And so I'm like, you probably don't watch Star Trek or Star Wars, or like I named off like main stuff. Like I'm not gonna go off and say some weird shit like, like name off like a random ass common writer,
Spectre Man,
or Red Man or something like that, or like even I can't think. I'm blanking. The giant robo or whatever.
Johnny Sacco and his giant flying robot.
Johnny Sacco and the giant flying robot. Yes, thank you. But like I'm not gonna name that stuff off. I'm gonna test the waters and be like, oh, so like, what do you think about Star Trek, or what do you think about Star Wars, and all that stuff. He's like, or she's like, well, my nephew's kind of like that stuff, but I say that because then later on we're talking about other things, like she's into true crime novels and police procedural TV shows like Law and Order and Blue Bloods and all that stuff. And I enjoy that stuff too. It's just, we all have different bents and different tastes of things we like. So I ramble all of that to say that it doesn't matter what you're into, as long as it's let me just say this, as long as it's a healthy obsession, because there's a difference between being obsessed with something and being a fan of something in a non-healthy way versus a very healthy way. I feel like now some may say differently, judging from my collection, I feel like I interact with this fandom in a very healthy way, right? And you, Elijah, Eric, Adrian, a lot of our friends, Nathan, Travis, all of them, we all try to interact with this fandom in a healthy way. Whereas some people, that we've, there doesn't mean that it doesn't make them bad people. It's just that some people that we've met along this journey, they don't interact with this fandom in a very healthy way. Like it's literally their personality. It's literally their entire personality. And that's not healthy.
Right. And, it's one of those things where I think, I'm trying to think here what I'm trying to say. There's nothing wrong with people. I mean, there's people we've introduced this to, right? Like there's people who didn't know this existed, and then
Absolutely.
they learn about it, right? And that could lead to a very nice relationship, whatever that may be, you know. And it's one of those things where I think, you know, I do agree there is a healthy level to this. And to that, I even just today, I went and visited my old boss from my old job. And she was like, "So, like, what, you know, what's who are you dating? Like, what's that like?" And I said, "Honestly, I don't think that's for me right now." And I explained, I was like, "Look, I'm streaming at least once a week. I'm
Right.
podcasting at least once a week. I work a 60-hour management job. I do I prep for each stream and each podcast. I need to sleep. I drive to all of this. And then I'm also doing like YouTube videos, and I'm writing scripts, and I'm working on other projects. And it's like, look, I it would be an unhealthy thing for me to try and be in a relationship to that level, to that scope, because that would be unfair. It would be
Right.
unfair because I like what I'm doing, right? I'm enjoying what I'm doing. And as long as I'm doing that, there's no reason to try to put more on my plate that will make me not enjoy something, right? Like
Exactly.
there's a fine line between overworking yourself just to work and enjoying what you're doing.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I know we've had many discussions on how I overbook myself sometimes.
You do.
And there's some weeks where it's like, man, I wish I was like a little less busy.
Mm.
But then, you know, I feel like in the last few weeks I've also been like, okay, let's enjoy what we're doing. And if we're not, then that needs to change.
Right. You know, like this is an ongoing conversation that you and I and a few other people that are in our circle have had, that the moment. So, okay. So for example, whenever I started on Kaiju Weekly back in 2019, and I started podcasting regularly and creating content and all this other stuff, right? So I made a promise to myself, and I said, Michael, the moment that this is fun, this is what you need right now, because I was going through some personal turmoil. At the time, I had just lost my parents, right? So I just lost my parents. So I was dealing with kind of that, with all that stuff going on. So I needed some kind of community, some kind of outlet, right? So I got involved in fandom, and I got involved specifically in Godzilla fandom because it's what I knew. It's what I knew growing up, and it seemed pretty, you know, all intents and purposes, it seemed pretty tame, right? So, right, little did I know, but I promised myself, and I made a promise to myself. I said, the moment that it becomes more work than fun, that is when I need to step back for a little while,
Right.
and reevaluate some things. And so I think, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think I'm reaching that point now, like in my fandom and in my relationships and everything going on, that I might need to take more of a step back, because it's not that I don't have fun talking to and interacting with people, because I've met some really fantastic people, like you, for example, Elijah, Eric, Joe, Adrian, Samson, Nathan, Travis, Danny, Kim, Donnie, and just I'm sure there's other people that I'm leaving out. Matt, Briquette, Jack, G-Man Hudgens, JR, all these people, Alex and Eric, Monsters versus Men. Like, I've met so many wonderful people over the years, and I'm still and I still maintain those relationships. And I think I plan on maintaining those relationships, as long as they remain healthy. I still plan on maintaining those relationships, but I'm to the point now where I don't need to always to be constantly interacting in a fandom to still maintain my friendships, because
Right.
like I'm like, to use our friend Jack for example, I'm just a text away to Jack. Like I can text Jack and he may be slow to get back to me, but he'll always get back to me, right?
Right.
Like, or same with you, or same with Adrian and Eric and the guys. Like they're always a text away. Like I don't need to hop on a stream with somebody to be able to interact with them. And that's the difference. That's kind of the evolution of where I've been, like we're, starting in 2019, where I needed that outlet. I needed that community because I was going through some shit, to now where I don't need it as much, but I still want to maintain those relationships. So where's the common ground, right? Like where's the commonality that we can land on that keeps me mentally and emotionally healthy while still interacting and hanging out with my friends, right?
Right. And that's something that you and I, like this last G Fest, became more like of a theme than ever. Because I mean, prior to that, Danny and I, in retrospective, talking about G Fest 2022, we had talked about how honestly the best part of that was being around everybody. First time being around our friends, right? And it hurt like an MFer last year to like leave. And then this year, like getting you there and meeting like Eric and Adrian and Joe and everybody. That's what made the weekend, right? That is what made G Fest memorable. That's what made G Fest this amazing thing. And honestly, as time continues to go on, like I keep saying this, but I'm really happy with where I'm at, mostly because of the friendships I've made, right? Like
you and I ended up having a really good heart to heart on like Friday night, or I think it was Friday night. Yeah, it was Friday night.
Yeah,
now,
it was Friday.
It was, I will say this, it was a little under the influence on my part, but we ended up having a nice heart to heart. But you're right. Like G Fest, like it was my very first G Fest, and I'd always heard the stories about G Fest, about how awesome G Fest is. And like, I went into G Fest thinking, okay, so it's going to be a few thousand Godzilla nerds all being nerds together. And it's just going to be another con. It's going to be another thing,
right?
It's just going to be an extra niche thing because Godzilla is a very niche thing. Right. But I was pleasantly surprised, first of all, how gracious people were when I got there. Like people that I've never met in person at all. Like Kim I've never met in person. That we've streamed with Kim a lot now. Kim, I consider Kim a good friend. And then people like, Kyle Yount and some others that, are acquaintances or colleagues. I guess you could call them colleagues because, we've all been doing kind of the same thing. Our streams haven't crossed a lot, but they have crossed some. So getting to meet people like that, and then also getting to spend time with Joe and Eric and you and Nathan and Danny and everybody else while I was there, like that is what made G Fest special, is the people. And that's what's important, is the people. Like not this bullshit of like, oh, G-Fan is a terrible magazine, JD Lee is a terrible person, whatever. I don't know how to describe it, but no one cared about that when we were there.
When you're in the moment, it doesn't matter the past. You're focused on what's in front of you. And for at least you and I, G-Fest, what's in front of us is these friendships that we've made, that we've had for years, and just being able to be there and have that, spend time with our Kaiju family, right? Like that, it feels very much like a family in a way.
It does.
And it's really nice. It's nice to have that almost like homecoming, right? That homecoming after being away for a year, right?
I joked about, I was joking with one of our friends and I said, this is a high school reunion for you, isn't it? It's like, or something of that nature. I can't remember exactly what I said to him, but in reality, it kind of is. It's like a reunion. Like you guys, get to come back and see each other every single year. Mm-hmm. But what makes it extra special is the relationships that you maintain even after the event is over.
Right. And I know at least for you and me, Michael, like I feel like our friendship has grown since
Eh,
G Fest. I feel like we've had more heart to hearts.
we have.
And I think that goes to show. I mean, before G Fest, we had only really seen each other once during AMA, but you and I were so busy like trying to vend and run around and
Yeah.
it just time kind of slipped away there. But for
Mhm.
G Fest,
Which was a great experience.
it was. It
AMA,
was
yeah, it was a fantastic experience. AMA was a great experience, but it felt like work.
right, exactly. You and I both had the same problem where we went back and like for a week and a half we were dead. Like it just we like so much energy was exhausted during AMA. It was kind of like I need a break from this. I need a vacation from the vacation because it felt there was a lot of work to be done on that trip, and I struggled going back to work the day after.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's one of those things where AMA was great. Like there were so many good memories at AMA, but G Fest really and honestly felt like that trip, that place to enjoy and relax and be able to spend time with your friends that you've made and meet new ones and develop great relationships.
Oh yeah.
So it's funny, we started with collecting and we went into this whole like philosophy on friendships and whatnot.
That's what Kaiju Conversations is about.
It is. It's about starting it at one point and going down the rabbit hole of what we can link together and what we can discuss, because like I said, there's a deeper thing than just liking kaiju. There's more than meets the eye.
Yeah, there's more to this. Right. It's it's healthy to remember though that it is just a hobby.
Right.
I don't want to beat a dead horse, but it is very healthy to remember that this fandom, this niche, right? This very small, minute corner of the world or of nerddom, which is the Godzilla fandom, is still just a hobby, and it's not your complete personality. Like,
right.
Don't if you're expecting to make a career from this, sorry to tell you, but that's probably not going to happen realistically.
Right.
There have been people that have been able to make a really nice name for themselves, like Monster Island Buddies and Kyle Yount and some others that have been able to make a really nice name for themselves. But yeah, at the end of the day, you should treat this as a hobby. You should treat this as a passion, not your entire existence. And I think that's a mistake. That's a mistake that a lot of people who want to get into content creation get locked into.
Right. And I want to touch on that, but real quick, I do want to go over the comments here. Samson said he can't wait to meet all of us in person. And then Eric even said that he worked on his G-Fest vacation, but he still enjoyed himself because of all the people he surrounded himself with and meeting new people the best weekend of the year.
Oh, that's right, because Eric worked at our friend Joe's booth, Beast of the East Collectibles, or Beast of the East Toys. I can't remember the exact name, but I think it's Beast of the East Collectibles. But yeah, Eric worked the booth there all weekend, but Eric still seemed to have a great time. I know, like whenever I was ever around Eric and Carrie and the crew, like they all seemed to be having a great time. Oftentimes at my expense, but that's just what friends do, I guess. Maybe. It is.
John, kind of going off of your whole what you said about this is a hobby, right? And that's very true. That's very true. Like at the end of the day, this is a hobby. This is what we like. I've always had the philosophy of everything you do, try to see how you can retroactively put it into what you want to do, right? So I want to be a filmmaker. I want to be a director, right?
Right.
Now, how can I learn how to direct from working retail? That was a question I asked once. And my answer was, well, when you're in management, which I am in management, you have to be a leader, right? And a director is the leader of a team. And a director's job is to direct people, right? So in a management level at a retail store, when you work at a major company like I do, how can you utilize what you're doing there to help you develop what you want to do in life? So when I go into work, I always have this like mental thought process of, okay, this needs to be perfect, right? Like I have to somehow perfectly enact what I see in my vision. And my vision does have to line up with what the company wants and expects from me to do day to day, right? So like sell merchandise, make customers happy, run the store, right? That's my job, is to make customers happy, sell merchandise, and run the store.
Right.
So each day I have to have an idea, a vision of how to do that perfectly. And I have to work with all, like if anybody calls in, if somebody leaves early or is late, or if a customer, there's a bad experience and I have to deal with it. Like if we're short staffed, I have to deal with that. I have to work with the problems.
It's your
that are there.
responsibility.
And that's what a director does, is he or she is a problem solver. He has a vision, he or she. They have a vision for what they want to see on the screen. And their job is to perfectly create that, but working with all the problems that also happen, right? So I use my job as a way to learn how to direct. Doing these live streams. How can I what makes people interested in these live streams? And there's plenty of streams out there that interview people and talk about like how you got into this fandom, what you like about this stuff and all that. Like that's great. That's great to know, right? Get to know your person. But I also looked at it and I was like, okay, what about just talking? Because Michael, we have no notes. We have nothing. We're just
shooting shit.
And I think we've already went down a couple of rabbit holes that have been very interesting and very important to kind of take a step back and look at who we are and what we do, right? Like that's always important to have a reality check and to know where you're at. And we've had conversations already about that. Like we're talking. There's no like personality. There's no I'm the littlest of gatekeepers. It's just we're talking. We're having.
I'm not the dude, bro.
Right. And that's nice. Like it's nice to kind of pull away the mask and just sit. Right.
I feel like a lot of us, and let me just say this, I'm not talking about anyone in particular. Let me just preface this by saying this. I feel like a lot of us play a character.
Right.
When we interact with character, when we interact with fandom, right? We play a character, we play a role, right? Because that's our way of protecting ourselves. Right. Because we're always scared we're always afraid to show our true selves or be vulnerable with people. So we put up a wall. Like sometimes the veil is not as thick as others, right? So like me, like sometimes I'm on stream and I cut up and be like the what is a nickname folks give me all the time?
Dude bro, Lord Gatekeeper.
Lord, Ego Ranger. We'll use that one.
Yeah.
But that is like a very elevated version of myself. Like that's not who I am. So like I cut up and I try to be funny even though I'm really not. And I feel like people try to hide behind those personas because they're afraid if they reveal their true selves to their friends and their colleagues and their fans or the listener, that they're going to be rejected for that.
Right.
So, that is where I see a problem. Because if you can't be your true self, if you can't like be vulnerable around people, especially the people that you're close with, right? It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have we're not talking about strangers here. We're talking about being on stream with like our friends, like just chit-chatting like we are here. If you can't be your true self around your friends, then like who the hell can you be your true self around?
Right.
And it's just a very lonely. I just feel like it's a very lonely existence to have to always feel like you have to like make up this persona and this act to present to people because because you have insecurities. And I'm not saying that we don't all have insecurities, because we do. Like I have massive insecurities that I have built up over the years just from past life experiences. So I have a ton of insecurities. But what I've been trying to intentionally do over the last several months is just be who my authentic, self. Like this is me being as real as I possibly can with you without, giving you my social security number. Like basically, everything about me at this point. And a lot of my close friends know everything there is to know about me at this point. I've shared some really intimate conversations with our friends Eric and Joe, and I've even shared them with Travis and sometimes Nathan and the rest of them. But those are the people that you can be truly vulnerable with. But what I'm saying is, and I kind of went off on a little tangent there, but what I'm ultimately trying to say is when you constantly feel like you have to pretend and act and play this character, this bloated caricature of yourself, you start losing yourself over time because the character takes over at that point and becomes you, and you lose your true authentic self behind the character.
Right.
Does that all make sense, or am I rambling?
No, I agree. Because I mean, one thing is like when I'm on cast with Rex, right? There's the typical stuff that Rex and I have to hit. Like GVK is the worst movie of all time. Ring is the best Japanese horror film of all time. Rex's opinion is wrong and my opinion is right. I mean, at the beginning of this, right? Like you saw that character, right? It's something that I think a lot of us were performers, right? We kind of fall into that initially, right?
Right.
And it's one of those things that I feel like, especially this conversation, like this is not how I act on cast, right? Like this is me just talking as one Elijah Thomas, right? And you are talking as Michael Hamilton, right? Like there's no expectation. There's no requirement. There's nothing of that nature, right? We're just here to talk. We're just here. We're sitting, talking into a microphone. We're not getting carried away with entertaining as much as interacting, right? And
we're pulling back the curtain a little bit, right? So we're pulling back that curtain a little bit. We're trying to be real people at this point. And I'm not, and let me just preface this by saying it's not like people that we interact with aren't to some degree their true authentic selves. It's just that sometimes we get so obsessed with the character that we portray, or the character we've invented for ourselves, we begin to just lose sight of who we actually are and why we got into this genre in the first place.
Right. And that's something that it's not even just like a us thing, right? Like every performer goes through that. Like a job of an actor or an entertainer is that they're entertaining and people want to watch them, right? But to entertain people all the time is exhausting. After every stream, like I'm kind of tired. Like it's exhausting it
is exhausting
do that. Because you're not just relaxing, right? Like you are there's a lot, even if it's not active, like you may not be lifting weights, right? Like you're not exercising like that, but in your brain, like you are thinking about how to play this. It's subconscious. It's all subconscious, right? You're thinking of, okay, so I'm on camera. You can see me. So that means I have to be big and bombastic, and I have to talk, and I have to entertain everybody, right?
Right.
And that's normal. That's subconscious. That's something that just happens.
It's like you were saying, like there are certain beats that you have to hit, right? There are certain tropes. There are certain personal and performative tropes that you have to hit within a stream, so that it's a joke that it's a joke that Nathan and I tell all the time on the Power Trip when we say when we get ready to do the awards, the awards that were borrowed from Monsters versus that were stolen from Monsters versus, or that were stolen by Kaiju Weekly, or stolen by, I don't remember the shtick now. I'm blanking on it. But basically, when we do the awards, we always go through this whole spiel of the awards that were borrowed from that were stolen from Monsters versus Men, used for Henshin Men, and were borrowed for Power Trip. The shtick has been fulfilled. Sometimes it's normal to just be like, okay, I'm going to do the shtick. I'm going to do the performance. I'm going to do the dance. I'm going to do the dance. And then, because that's what people expect me to do. Right. Or that's what's expected of me, to do the dance. Mm-hmm. So the moment that we are able to release like that from ourselves, to say, oh, I don't have to perform in front of these people. I don't have to be the caricature. I don't have to be the littlest gatekeeper. I don't have to be the dude bro. I'm using this as examples. I don't have to be Mr. Shameless Self-Promotion. I don't have to do that stuff. The moment that we can let go of that, I feel like the happier we are.
Right.
Because we can be our true selves. Yeah. Exactly.
And something that I wanted to point it out there that's very interesting, and I think this speaks on a conscious level of how entertainment and being a public figure in a way, and being a talking head or whatever personality, an internet personality, you couldn't remember the tropes of Power Trip, and you've done Power Trip for almost 2 years now, right? There's certain things that, like Kaiju Weekly, there are certain things we have to hit for each stream that you don't think of until it happens, right? Like it's a purely like subconscious thing. And then when you're not in that zone, when you're not thinking like you do during that stream, you suddenly can't remember it.
Right.
It suddenly is no longer muscle memory.
Right. Because you're not in the flow of that particular, it's like you said, it's muscle memory. It's like you're not in the flow of that conversation. Like you're not, like I don't sit around, like if I'm watching the news or if I'm listening to the news or something like that, I don't automatically say to myself, cue the beady beady. I don't automatically do that. Like that would be stupid. Like if I were to like be sitting in the middle of Starbucks watching watching a YouTube video about what's happening in the world on a news station, I don't just randomly blurt out in the middle of Starbucks, cue the beady beady. Like it's like that would be insane. That would be stupid, right? I mean, you could do that if you wanted to. No one's stopping you, and it's completely harmless and innocuous to do that. But like you said, it's muscle memory. It's like when we get into this mode of we have to perform,
right?
That's when our mentality changes. Like we go from being, I'm Michael Hamilton, I am a person who loves kaiju, to I'm Michael Hamilton, I have to perform for these people and do the tropes and say the things and do this and do the taglines. And some of that is necessary, I think, for show consistency, right? I think a lot of that is good. It's good to have a consistent flow to your show,
right?
But it is easy to fall into the tropes of a show, right? To fall into the act, to fall into the performance.
Right. And speaking of people who are very raw and very true to themselves, Donnie has entered in the chat.
Donnie, old Donnie boy. It's old Donnie. I've got Danny boy and I've got Donnie boy.
So hi Donnie, welcome to the stream. We're having a philosophical conversation about performing in front of people. And I kind of wanted to jump on that real quick. So like at work sometimes there's certain things. I mean, when you work at where I work, it's very common to like hear certain things multiple times. And I remember there's been a few moments where somebody says something, and I can't even think of it right now, but like a little like thing will turn in my head. It's like, wait a minute, that's a joke from a podcast. And I could say that. And I chuckle because like I think it's funny. And then they're like, what's so funny? And I say, well, it's an inside joke between me and some friends, and you wouldn't get it. Like like it wouldn't work. And even more so than that, like there are things that, like, I'm gonna be honest, I forget what I say in podcasts. When I get on a stream, when I get on a panel, I mean, this happened. I mean, a best example, the Korean Kaiju Chaos panel at G-Fest. I can't tell you a single thing I said. I don't remember. And that's because once I got into that situation, once I got into that place, my brain just switched to I'm a panelist or I'm a podcaster and I'm hosting Kaiju Conversation. I'm co-hosting Kaiju Weekly. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And I just go. Like, I don't think. I don't take a step back and say, okay, what am I going to say? It's boom, I'm going. Like, we're running. There's no walking. It's as soon as the record buttons hit, we're running. We're doing this. We are the littlest of gatekeepers. We are Elijah Thomas, the host of Kaiju Conversation. We are a panelist at G-Fest where people are watching me. We are the know-it-all of this topic, and we are expected to know this and do that. Like, that's what happens. And then, like, during this stream, like, I could tell you what we're talking about because I'm thinking, I'm dwelling on what we're saying, and I'm letting that sit. I'm letting that conversation boil. I'm letting that come out because we're not here to perform. We're not here to entertain. We're not here to enlighten. We're not here to do any of this, right? Our job in this stream is to be nothing but ourselves.
Right.
There is no
Donnie,
expectation.
Bring up Donnie's comment really quick. I don't know how long you've been here, Donnie, but this is exactly what we've been talking about the last 30 minutes. Is this performative, is the expectation to perform, right? Or even the it's self-inflicted a lot of times, this self-inflicted expectation to perform, because just to recap what we were talking about, Donnie, to catch you up, Elijah and I have been talking about how we put so much pressure on ourselves to perform and show off one side of ourselves to the camera because we're afraid if we're our true, authentic, vulnerable selves, people won't like that. So we have to lean into the tropes. We have to lean into the inside jokes. We have to lean into the things that make the shtick. And if we do that so much, my point is, if we do that so much, at some point, the shtick and the performance becomes the person, and the person gets lost behind the performance, if that makes sense. So that's kind of catching you up at of what we've been talking about.
You know, I have to make this joke because I've been thinking about it from the moment we started talking about this. You know, it's like, I mean, I feel like this is all perfectly described in a certain song that starts with, if you had one moment, one opportunity to seize everything you wanted in life, would you capture it or just let it slip? But in that song, okay, so in that song, Eminem says his knees are weak, his arms are heavy, there's vomit on a sweater already, mom's spaghetti. He's nervous, but on the surface, he looks calm and ready. To drop bars. That's
he keeps on forgetting
what he wrote down. The whole crowd goes so loud. like that right there is what happens, right? Like, I have major stage fright. I get anxious and nervous. And real quick, we've got Adrian with 8 Mile, Lose Yourself. Yes. And then hello, Kaiju Dork. It's good to see you. And
Hello.
then Donnie here. Makes sense. Thanks for the recap, by the way. I think there's a certain point where the personal and the performative can bleed together healthily. It takes time, though, for that to happen authentically. And he's absolutely correct.
You're absolutely right.
That's something that, as time goes on, that is something you develop. I think you really kind of have to ramp up the personality to realize, look, this is where I'm performing. This is where I'm at. I got to bring that to the middle. And then you have a very beautiful middle ground. And then we got Helmy in the chat. Hello, Helmy. I prefer mom's spaghetti.
I also prefer mom's spaghetti.
But
I make spaghetti. I've made spaghetti my mother's way for years, and I will never ever change how I make my spaghetti, because that's what I grew up with. Like, there are probably fancier ways to make spaghetti, but I refuse to make them that way.
Right. And that he looks nervous, or he's nervous, but on the surface he's calm and ready. Like, I have major stage fright. I remember one time in school, I had to give a presentation in front of the superintendent of the school district. I had to in front of the principal and my teacher, and I was graded, and they were the ones grading. And it was about how we would do a business and like how we would do this advertising campaign. And I was the kid that never studied in school. I don't study. I think studying is a waste of my time. And if it wasn't during school, I wouldn't do it. And I went in and I had no idea what the slideshow said. I was horrified. But I've developed this kind of personality of, I'm nervous on the inside, but on the surface, it's like a regular old Wednesday for me. And I just do it, right? Like doing the panel with the Korean kaiju. That was in the big ballroom. I've already went on record saying nobody told me that was the big ballroom. Nobody told me that I was going to be in the biggest room in that convention in front of people, and nobody told me that there was going to be a crowd of like 200 people. Like, nobody said that. Nobody told me that.
That's because you're a big baller.
Thank you. Cue
the Sam trombone. Okay.
I don't have a soundboard, thankfully. But it's one of those things. Yet this is very true. I was horrified. I was freaking out. I had a minor anxiety attack right before the countdown hit 0 to start that panel.
Oh, I remember.
But I did it. And I switched on the performance and I went with that. And I mean, that works. That is helpful. That definitely makes moments like that good. And that, that it works and it helps. But what you can learn from that, and this goes back to how I try to take everything I say and see how I can make that directing, right? I can take all of these moments where I'm nervous, but I still do it. And how can I make that me? And that's where you can kind of bring the personality and the reality together. And that's a beautiful moment. That's a magical moment, because in that moment you have figured out how to be your true self and how to work on being your true self to a better self that takes the positive aspects from performing and the positive aspects of being yourself and make a better version of yourself. And we have had a lot of comments, so I want to catch up here. Helmy says, amen. I get major anxiety talking to anyone new, let alone being in front of a camera or a stage.
Helmy, I don't believe that. You did wonderful at G-Fest.
And then we have Samson asking, what if talking too much and being odd is just your personality? And that point, go for it. You do you, man.
If talking too much and being weird is your personality, you know what? Talk way too much and be weird. It's fine.
Then Donnie's here saying it took me forever to overcome stage fright. I think both teaching and YouTube have helped me with that considerably. And Donnie, when you and I kind of talked, I think it was off recording. I think we talked about how your teaching kind of helped you figure that out. And that was such an enlightening and an interesting thing.
Because
to talk
kids are
about.
brutal. They're brutal.
I mean, a kid, like a 5-year-old will walk up to somebody and say you're fat, and they won't think about anything. Like, they'll be brutally honest.
Right.
And it's true. Like, they're brutal. And I think the more you work with kids, especially, it becomes like you learn a lot. You can learn a lot from kids. And I think Donnie, if I remember correct, Donnie teaches college level.
He does. I believe, Donnie, correct me if I'm wrong, but you teach freshman level or freshman English. I think freshman English. Yes.
He says, thankfully I teach adults. I don't know if I could teach kids. I'm not that tough. I think I'm pretty sure you're correct, Michael. And it's one of those things where, it's, let's see, he just gave an answer. I teach English all across the board, introduction classes and advanced classes.
Okay.
So Donnie's like really, really smart.
Well, that's a good point. Well, that Donnie is very, very smart. That is also a good point. But the point that I'm piggybacking off of is the fact of how children have this like honesty to them. Like I joke because in my day job, I'm an art director and I deal with clients and people all the time. And I joke to some degree of honesty that I prefer animals over people because animals are honest. Animals, they tell you how they're feeling, as long as you meet their basic needs, they're happy, etc. But I believe in some ways, and I'm not saying that kids are animals, although they do sometimes act like animals. There's an innocence and an honesty to children, right? Like, kids are not afraid to act and be their most authentic selves. Like, right. Kids don't care. Like, kids literally don't care. Like, if they're into the weirdest thing, they're going to be like, I'm into this. Have you ever watched this? This is great. And they're not going to care who's going to judge them. So it's really, as we get older, as adults, we begin to get like not stigmatized, but we get traumatized sometimes. We begin to develop this fear of being our authentic selves as we get older, because we learn how cruel and how awful the world can be. And so that makes us want to suppress that kind of stuff. And we were talking earlier about, relationships and friends and, people coming into my Godzilla room here because the rest of my apartment is incredibly normal and just normal, average adult male living by himself apartment. And then they walk into this room and it's like a shock. Right. So I feel like we need to learn how to develop that childlike innocence and that childlike honesty when we're interacting with each other.
And see, I think that's a major thing. Is I think all of us, for the most part, have partly why we like this Godzilla stuff, even as we grow old, is I
don't mean to laugh, but it just struck me. Oh boy, Samson.
It's one of those things where I think partly why we gravitate towards Godzilla is that was a part of our childhood. It takes us back to a time in our life where
back to the Stone Age.
Back to the Stone Age. Where you didn't have to worry about bills. You didn't have to worry about, I got to get this job assignment done. I've got to wake up and I have to go to this meeting. I've got to, go do this and go do that. You got to enjoy your life. And it's a nice moment that you can have. And you get to just in a way, go back to that time period. I'm sure, Michael, there's been moments where you've remembered how you felt during 1994's Monster Vision. I'm sure there's been a few moments, whether it's watching a Godzilla movie on TV or putting in a VHS or something. I know Danny, our friend, has talked about how he'll put on Godzilla VHSs just to remember how it was growing up, and having moments like that.
King of the Monsters. I had that moment. I know. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No. I would understand and completely get that.
Like King of the Monsters. I had that. Even with 2014, I had that because 2014, I wasn't back in the fandom. I remember when I saw the trailer for 2014, and I was in my bedroom at when I was still living with my parents. This is before, I got married and all that. I was still living with my parents, and because my ex-wife and I wasn't living together at the time. And like I remember the Godzilla for the Godzilla 2014 trailer came on, and like I felt that, like, seeing that, like seeing Godzilla come back to the big screen and actually be Godzilla, like that felt that awakened something in me that started me on a very long trip back down memory lane. And I did not realize how many years later it would be that I would actually need that. So like I talked a little bit about this earlier, but fandom was there when I needed it the most. And, I had a lot of friends that I had a lot of friends to support me as well. Fandom and friendship was there when I needed it the most because I needed community. This was 2018. So, mom had passed away by that point. And then leading into 2019 and 2020 when dad passed away. So after all of those events, like I started leaning more and more into the things that I remembered as a child. And at the time I felt really silly. Right. Mm-hmm. But what has been the most rewarding for a lot of things, specifically talking about really even the power trip, because this is kind of the ethos of the ethos of the power trip was I was going through a rough patch, personally and relationally, and I randomly turned on Power Rangers on Netflix when it was still there, and I started watching it because I needed that little like dopamine hit, right? I needed that little escapist dopamine hit, and the deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper I got into it, the more I started realizing, oh, okay, so there's more to this stuff than what I remember as a child. It's still cheesy and it's still fun and it's still cringy at times, but there's a lot more to these properties like Godzilla and Power Rangers and Transformers and all the stuff that we enjoy that we didn't necessarily pick up on as children, but now as we're seeing them through adult eyes, like we're able to have that level of enjoyment that we weren't able to have as kids because we just didn't know any better.
Right.
Like we didn't know, or we didn't care like the effects of the bomb. We didn't know that stuff. We had to find that stuff out later. And when we became mature enough to truly understand these deeper concepts and these deeper themes within these films and these TV shows, that's when my personal enjoyment really picked up, because I was able to see these properties for what they were, what I felt the directors intended them to be.
Right. And to that, I think there is also a level of, I mean, there's the joke of nostalgia and loving stuff for nostalgia reasons. But I think it's
called nostalgia and corsets, I think is what it would have been said by a friend of ours.
But in all honesty, I feel like nostalgia is going to be something in everyday life, like subconsciously, of course, but subconsciously, everything kind of has why we love this stuff goes back to nostalgia. Newer movies, like the reason we like them is nostalgia. We're seeing a trend in Hollywood where fan service is something, and that thrives off of nostalgia. The scene
absolutely.
in Godzilla versus Kong where Kong shoves his axe down Godzilla's throat, that wasn't done as just, oh, this is funny. That was because, oh, this is nostalgic for the scene back in King Kong versus
1962.
Godzilla.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's it. Nostalgia is something in society that will never go away.
No.
It helps us remember back to a time we liked or something else, you know? It helps us remember things of our past. And that brings joy to us, right?
Mm.
And you know, we saw that when, I mean, there's, you know, the stereotype of how grandparents tell their grandchildren stories of how they grew up and whatnot. That's built off of nostalgia, right? That's them remembering their past and sharing it with others and seeing their interest and what they like about it. And that's the magical part of storytelling is the nostalgia and the callback to a time that people could take that story and incorporate it. Every movie, every comic, every TV show, every story has to have been inspired by something prior.
Yeah, there is nothing, you know, there is nothing new under the sun.
Right.
Nothing. Like there is no new thing. I feel like there are very few. I mean, I don't know if this is going to be a controversial statement or not, but I feel like there are very little to zero new ideas hanging out there in the ether somewhere to grab hold of. Like,
but
everything is an offshoot of something. Go ahead.
But I think that's okay, because I don't think what you said there is really a negative or controversial thing, because I mean, I don't think you're saying that in a negative connotation. I feel like you're just pointing it out because it is true. I mean, look at Star Wars. A person who does not agree with the social norm goes out of their way to fight the social norm and then gets other people to join in their rebellion and fight to defeat the social norm for the better of humanity or for the better of them, right? And I feel like you can trace that back. There's plenty of stories that talk about that. I mean, Star Wars took it from the Hidden Fortress, but you see, I mean, Westerns. There's a ton of Westerns that have that similar premise. The lone gunslinger who doesn't agree with somebody who has this hold over society. I mean, look at how America was born. There were people that didn't like how people were running things, so they said, okay, let's try and do something new. And they fought that. Like, it's the same story. It's the same concept. The same basic story can be found in history. That's because that's how it works. Now, nobody would say, oh, Star Wars is like the American Revolution, because nobody's going to say that, right? But the same premises of the events of history are in Star Wars. And that's not a good or bad thing. That's just how it works. That's how storytelling works. And that's perfectly okay. And Donnie here sent a message. I think originality is a nebulous concept, truthfully. Most things have been created historically speaking. Have been influenced or inspired by other work. Yeah.
That's true.
And I think a lot of that comes from nostalgia. Comes from that, you know, that nice dopamine rush of remembering something from your past. And I think that's perfectly okay. Nostalgia is something that just society has.
Yeah.
So there was another rabbit hole. I feel like we had like 2 or 3 there.
I think the nostalgia is like one of those things that, like, I feel like you could do a whole episode on, because nostalgia touches so much.
Right.
And like you pointed out, like, there is this push for nostalgia in popular culture now. Like, look at how many remakes of classic TV shows there are now. Like, or offshoots of classic TV shows. Like the one, I don't know if I would consider this a classic, but I guess it's a classic to some people. You take that 90s show, right?
Mhm.
Which is an offshoot of that 70s show, right? So or look at what Disney's doing, right? So what Disney's doing is tapping into that nostalgia and remaking some of these classic movies for a new audience. And that's okay. That's okay. We can choose whether or not we want to enjoy them or not. Personally, there have been very few live action ones that I've actually enjoyed. I've not seen all of them, but to some degree, I do prefer the classics over the remakes. Like for example, Lion King. Lion King is a shot-for-shot remake of the original cartoon. If I wanted that, then I would just go back and watch the original cartoon. Like that's just how it is for me personally. But nostalgia is it's a warm blanket when you need it, but it's also a really powerful drug, right?
Right.
Nostalgia blinds us. Nostalgia can blind a lot of us to seeing things that aren't necessarily there.
Samson messaged in, nostalgia is all we have these days, and society's so crazy, and escape to a simpler time where things were great and carefree is a way to escape from all of today's crap. Which I think I agree with. I feel like sometimes, you have problems, and like you said, it's a warm, fuzzy blanket on a cold winter night.
But I'm going to play devil's advocate there and just say that too much nostalgia is a bad thing. Like
I would agree.
If we continuously keep looking backwards, we're never going to see what's in front of us, right? Like I'm trying to sound smarter than I actually am, but if we keep looking back to like nostalgic things to us, like I feel like it prevents us from facing the present realities that we have to face.
Right. And I think nostalgia could be could be a very powerful tool to help us figure out an answer for the future. There is that saying of the answer to all today's problems are in the past. Right? Is that the saying? I feel like that's pretty close to it.
The quote is escaping me. There is a quote that says for us to have a brighter future, we must learn from the past.
Yes,
which is an offshoot of another quote that I'm having trouble remembering right now.
I'm gonna look it up because we're doing it live.
We're doing it live. F it. We're doing it live.
And this is what this is all about, just seeing the raw. There
is a really nice quote about nostalgia that it's coming to mind now. Hang on, and I will there is a nice quote about nostalgia that I got from one of my favorite shows of all time, Mad Men, because I am a graphic designer. I love ads. I love marketing and things like that. So we've quoted this before on the Power Trip. I don't know if I've quoted it elsewhere, but this is a conversation just to kind of set things up. This is a conversation that the antagonist, protagonist, however you want to view this character in the show, Don Draper, is having with the executives of Kodak, and they're trying to sell this new way of presenting photos of your family called the carousel, right? So the quote is, nostalgia, it's delicate but potent. Teddy, who he talks about in the episode, told me that in Greek, nostalgia literally means the pain from an old wound. It's a tinge in your heart, far more powerful than the memory alone. This device isn't a spaceship; it's a time machine. It goes backwards and forwards. It takes us to a place where we ache to go again. It's not called the wheel; it's called the carousel. It lets us travel the way a child travels, around and around and around and back home again, to a place where we are loved.
That's a good quote. That's a really good quote. That's actually a lot to break down. That's a really heavy quote. And that was from Power Rangers?
God, no, that was from the Power Trip, but we used the original quote.
Oh, gotcha.
The original quote came from a show called Mad Men, which was a show in the mid 2000s.
Okay. Real quick, Donnie had to head off, so goodbye, Donnie. I hope you have a great night.
Donnie. And
Nathan Marchand has returned at the same time.
He has returned back from his ballet lesson. Good to see you, sir.
To kind of go back real quick to so this is the quote from Albert Einstein. The future is an unknown, but a somewhat predictable unknown. To look to the future, we must first look back upon the past. That is where the seeds of the future were planted. I think that's the quote I was thinking of, or like a segment of that.
Probably, yeah.
And yeah, it's, it's very nostalgia is a very, very powerful thing. And you have movies that's all they are. Look at Ready Player One. That is just a nostalgia-filled film, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But if we kept doing that, there's going to be nothing new. And then you have stuff like Barbie, which is a non-IP franchise for film, at least. You have Oppenheimer.
I would say that Barbie is sort of a more nihilistic take on nostalgia.
I agree. And you even have like the upcoming film The Creator by Gareth Edwards, director of 2014, that isn't based off of an IP. It's not I mean, there's tropes that are found in all of cinema, right? But it's not going out of its way to be that. It's not going out of its way to be a remake or a legacy sequel or a spin-off or a prequel. It's just doing its own thing.
Right.
And it's really nice to see stuff like that because it'll help. It'll help create something new. And we need that to keep moving forward in life. We need to create new stuff. Something that, I mean, going back here to be kind of on topic for kaiju, something Godzilla -1 appears to be doing something completely different. What if Godzilla appeared in 1945 following the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Like, I still, like, I'm a huge fan of this stuff, and I don't know how I would do that.
Yeah.
Like, that is such a foreign concept to me that it literally, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to think. It's insane.
Because we have seen this character analyzed from every single angle to death ad nauseum at this point, which is why I was talking with our mutual friend Danny the other day, and we both agreed that there's only so much more you can. There's only so many, and this is just an example. There's only so much more you can do to analyze 1954 that hasn't already been done, right? So that's what makes things like -1, Singular Point, to some degree, the anime trilogy. As much as I dislike that trilogy, I won't say it's grown on me. There are certain aspects of the anime trilogy I respect. Same with Shin, but I digress. But that's what makes -1 and Singular Point in particular, because those are the two that I enjoy the most. Or -1, I haven't seen it yet, but I'm sure I'll enjoy it. Singular Point I enjoy because it was just such a brand new kind of take on the character, a take on that story that we have never seen before with the character. And it gives new material and new things for fans to talk about outside of just rehashing the same old stuff over and over and over. Yes, Mothra versus Godzilla is about crony capitalism. Yes, King Kong versus Godzilla is about the dangers of commercialism. commercialism. Thank you, as the word was escaping me. The dangers of overly commercialized IP or commercialization. 1954, obviously about the bomb. Like, there's just, these things have been rehashed to death at this point. So when we get something like a Singular Point that looks at the character from a new angle, to some degree, I don't know. I don't think fans really know how to really analyze it, because we've been used to this one thing and the way things have been done for so long, that when something comes along that rocks that boat or rocks that perception, that we have a big problem dealing with that.
Right. And historically speaking, there's two instances of that. Both were viewed as very negative until recent times. And I'm thinking of Yoshimitsu Banno's Godzilla vs. Hedorah and Roland Emmerich's Godzilla 98. Both were very drastic, different interpretations of the character and different outlooks on what the character could be used for. And both instances saw a lot of controversy from the people behind the original films and people who were fans of this stuff. Up until recent times, where, I mean, Hedorah had its reevaluation a few years ago, and even 98 is seeing a reevaluation, right? Like, these films are being reevaluated in two of the most artistically different outlooks of the character have been reevaluated. And I think we'll look to this era of Godzilla in the future as a era of reinterpreting, reinventing the character.
Right.
I mean, Shin Godzilla is a perfect example. The anime trilogy, Singular Point, as you said, and -1. Like, -1 is a type of Godzilla we never thought possible. A Godzilla that ignores the Daigo Fukamaru, I believe, incident of March 1st, not March 1st, I think so, or the Castle Bravo testings, or anything like that. This is like ground zero. This is like right after the bombing. That is an idea that I can't fathom, and I've been a Godzilla fan for over almost 2 decades now, and I don't know how to take that. I've watched every movie at least 3 times. I'm doing a podcast that talks about the movies. I've written about these movies. I've collected these movies and the action figures, and watched hours upon hours of bonus content on this stuff. And I can't wrap my head around what they're going to do to make this Godzilla like truly Godzilla. But I'm here for it, and I'm so excited to see what -1 will bring to the table. Real quick, Nathan brought up G98 is only getting reevaluation because of its nostalgia.
Yeah, it is. I don't think that movie is going through a full reevaluation, but there are certain sections of the fan base that are trying to show it a little bit more respect than it has gotten. I don't think G98 will ever earn the respect that I just don't think that G98 will ever earn the respect that many fans who are nostalgic for that one wanted to. Just simply because there's too much known about that film now that detract from it. So, for example, his name is Roland Emmerich. Yes. Roland Emmerich has now been on record of saying, "Oh, I hated Godzilla. I wanted to do something totally different from the Japanese." So because the Japanese Godzilla was silly and campy and whatever. So I don't think Godzilla 98 will ever get a true quote reevaluation like films for like more classic films like Godzilla's Revenge, King Kong versus Godzilla, Son of Godzilla, like some of those, or Godzilla versus Hedorah. Like those films have gotten over the years. Final Wars is due for. I feel like Final Wars is going to be the next one to probably receive that more mainstream.
I'd love for that too. I'd love for that movie to get reevaluated. Now,
I think Final Wars is going to be the next one to get reevaluated on a more serious level.
So, I'm going to kind of circle back around here because you brought up how Emmerich basically said that Japanese Godzilla is stupid and he wanted to do something different. So with that, and I'm not trying to bait you here, I'm just curious what you think. Adam Wingard has went on record on the official disc, not even like an interview, on the official disc, saying that none of this makes sense. It's just a giant monster movie. How do you feel like that will be perceived in the future? As he basically says that giant monster movies don't really need a plot. I'm just curious on your, like, I'm not going to argue. Like, whatever you say, I'm not going to argue. I'm just curious what you think to that.
I think there is a slight difference, but there's a slight difference between what Wingard has said and what Emmerich has said.
Right.
Emmerich had zero respect for the franchise. He had zero respect for the concept of Godzilla. He had zero respect for what Ishiro Honda and the others had done with the character. He had zero respect for it. Like to Emmerich, the impression I've gotten from Emmerich and listening to the interviews and reading the material, like the impression I've got is Emmerich just did not like the character. The only reason it was called Godzilla is because of the IP, because the IP was valuable. That's all. Or the name was valuable, I should say. For Wingard, I think Wingard took a very cavalier approach to his viewing of giant monster movies. I'm not saying that Wingard isn't a fan, because, you know, he obviously cared enough about the character to make it more Godzilla-ish than what we've seen before. Him and Michael Dougherty, I feel like, did good by the character. We can argue all day about the final product and whether the story and the plot and the CGI and stuff like that was good. Those are things that can be argued. Right. But I do believe that Wingard had more respect for the character than Roland Emmerich did.
Okay.
I disagree with Wingard when he says that monster movies don't need a plot, because we've seen monster movies that have fantastic plots, like Monster Zero, for example, has a wonderful plot. And Monster Zero is not even really carried by its kaiju action. It's carried by its human characters. It's carried by it's carried by the plot and the subplot, everything going on in it. And it's a highly valuable monster movie. So I think Wingard is wrong in his assessment that giant monster movies don't need plots, that this is all silly and all we need is giant monkey, giant lizard, punchy. I disagree with that. And I think that, unfortunately, those comments are probably going to be viewed later on, if they're not being already viewed as in the same vein as what Emmerich has said about his work on Godzilla 98.
Okay.
It's just it's not a very tactful way to address the IP, is what I think it'll be viewed as.
Now, okay, I do want to ask you a follow-up question to that. And again, I'm not arguing. I'm just curious, like, what your reasoning is. So you said that Wingard respected and valued the IP, right? Now, I can't see that at all. Now, I want to know, so how come you, because I would agree that Dougherty clearly has a respect and a care for the IP. I think it would be ignorant to suggest otherwise. I just think Dougherty got a little carried away and kind of missed the mark on a few aspects of his movie. But Wingard, I feel like, didn't really show that. So why would you, like, how do you put them together? Curious.
Because he did not, I feel like Wingard did not set out to change Godzilla's character in this movie. Okay. He didn't set out to make Godzilla this animal. Like he honored the character by making Godzilla like a literal god, a deity. Like he could have easily just leaned into more of the animalistic side of the MonsterVerse, where they're just giant creatures who who happen to live dormant on this planet. In that regard, I think Wingard did respect the character a little bit more. That might be shallow. I mean, that might be a shallow take. I don't know. I've not watched enough Doherty's commentary to really understand his mentality working on the film. I think that he spoke at. I think making those comments of, monster movies are silly and they don't need plots. That's him speaking out of turn, and him speaking out of ignorance of what the franchise has done up to this point, where Doherty did have a love and respect for the IP, and Doherty probably did go a little overboard with King of the Monsters. Doherty made a film for fans that fans could love, but the general audience hated. Wingard made a movie that the general audience apparently loved, but now fans hate it. So it's hard. It's a hard question to answer, admittedly.
And in a way, I would almost say that you kind of you could trace that back. Like, the audience likes it, but the fans don't, and the fans don't like it, and the audience does. It's almost like if you don't perform to a certain extent, people might not like it, but your friends may like it. I'm trying to like relate this back to like what we were saying about how there's this like feeling of you have to play a character to be entertaining in a way. Kind of like that. Kind of like you could argue that King of the Monsters is the true kind of kaiju, right? Like it loves what has come before, and clearly Doherty respected the concepts and the ideologies of kaiju films, because I mean you can pull quotes where he goes and basically counters what Wingard would later say. In a lot of regards, I know Doherty has mentioned that he didn't want a kaiju movie that went to the same spots that had already happened. And in GVK, Wingard goes right back to Antarctica, right? Like that ideology of Doherty got, it's flipped in GVK, right? Like Wingard didn't have the same ideology as Doherty. And I've always said I'd love to hear what Doherty truly believes and thinks of GVK, because of his comments kind of going against what Wingard set out to do.
Now it brings up it's worth bringing up the comment from our friend Nathan that he said Wingard, it can be argued, didn't fully understand what Godzilla is, or white Godzilla is. Godzilla's not white that I know of. he's pretty gray. So I mean, an albino Godzilla, that would actually be pretty cool.
That would be cool. But no, I agree with what Nathan said.
Is that valid though? It's valid to say that these guys like Wingard, and even to some extent to throw Emmerich a very tiny chicken bone, maybe just did not truly understand what Godzilla is.
Right.
So therefore, they could take it in two directions. They could go the radical reinterpretation and go the Emmerich route, or they could make an educated guess what Godzilla is with GVK. Would you say that it's fair to? Would you say it's fair to say that Wingard, even if he didn't fully understand the character and the nuances of the character, still made an educated guess what Godzilla truly was?
Are you asking me that?
I'm asking you that, yeah.
Okay. I would not. And the reason I would say that is I have a few friends who love horror. Like they do a podcast about horror. And they have talked about how Wingard famously basically told the horror community, I don't care what you want, I'm going to do what I want, right? Which is which is honorable. Like
He said that about Death. It was about Death Note, wasn't it?
Blair Witch.
It was on Blair
because
Witch. That's what it
so
was.
for Blair Witch, he did the controversial thing of showing the witch, because in the original two, it was left as ambiguous on whether the witch was real or like what was going on. They
Or if
never
it was just
clarified.
a bunch of kids hearing noises in the woods and being paranoid. Right.
Yes. And or if it was all a joke, right? Like nobody knows. That was what the Blair Witch Project was. Blair Witch 2, I mean, everybody hated, so you know, people kind of all dogpile on that one. Whereas for Blair Witch, what Wingard did is he followed what the franchise was, which was a found footage horror movie. And that was it. He took the basic concept and did his own thing. And at the end, he does reveal the witch. He reveals that it's supernatural. Prior to Blair Witch, it was asked, okay, is this aliens? Is this nothing at all? Is it supernatural? Is there a witch? Is this somebody else that's doing this? Is this all a prank? We don't know. That was the mystery and the horror behind Blair Witch. The idea of what's beyond the darkness. What is beyond the camera lens that we can't see.
Right.
Whereas for Blair Witch, it's very well established, okay, it's a supernatural being, which kind of took away the horror and the mystery of Blair Witch, which was the biggest complaint horror fans had with that film. For Death Note, and Nathan has enlightened me a bit because Nathan's watched Death Note the show and he's watched the movie. Death Note is a very, very surface level understanding of the IP, the property, right? And his complaints for Death Note are what I have for GVK. And the complaints that people have for his Blair Witch movie is the same I have for GVK, which is it's a very surface level concept of the character. So for me, I think that Wingard just doesn't dive into these things, which is why I was curious on why you think the movie, which is why I thought it was interesting that you compared Adam Wingard to Michael Dougherty, because I, as much as I can complain about King of the Monsters, I cannot say that Dougherty is not a fan. I cannot say that Dougherty does not understand the assignment, because Dougherty clearly does. His quotes, his statements, his clear fandom, like, I can't argue that. I cannot. If I did, that would be wrong of me. Whereas Wingard, I feel like, does have that issue of having a very basic outlook on the franchise. And that's just something I think Wingard does. Wingard wants to do what he wants to do, which is admirable, good for you. But when you're tackling IP-based characters, there are things you have to do to create that a part of the IP. Does that make sense?
There it is, but I would also argue that I would also argue that I think it was necessary for GVK to be that surface level because that's what people needed at the time.
Right. And I get what you're saying there. I get it. It was like the escapist entertainment, right? Like that was needed at the time. But that's also why I think as time goes on, that film is going to be reevaluated in a negative light. As we get farther and farther away from the coronavirus and whatnot, Go ahead.
Which makes me ultimately worried for a new empire, because I feel like they're gonna. My fear is they're gonna try to recapture the same magic as
GVK.
And it's just not gonna hold water because now we're past COVID. Now we're effectively. As my Siri starts going off, sorry about that. As we're now past COVID, and we are effectively past COVID at this point. Like we're well past COVID. So my fear is they're going to try to recapture that magic of GVK, and it's just not going to resonate as much as I'm hoping it will.
Right. And I don't know what you've heard about the movie, but from what I've heard, I think that is a very valid concern. And I would love to be proven wrong. I would love to be proven wrong that, Adam Wingard's actually a great director and he's more than qualified to do a Godzilla movie and he creates a good one. I would love that. I will never wish disaster on a Godzilla movie, right? Like, I feel like that would be very not fan of me to wish that Godzilla would fail, right?
Right.
But I do have, those reservations of being a little concerned that he's going to recreate that and he's just going to basically go back and do round 2 of what he already did.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I would hope that he's smart enough to not do that.
Right. I agree. Going back here, we've got some comments here. All right, Elijah, what's the difference between Emmerich and Wingard when it comes to Godzilla? I think that if you want to fully understand that, I think I've pretty well explained it. Well, okay, actually, maybe not. I would say the difference between Wingard and Emmerich is Emmerich didn't care about anything. He was just doing a job, right? Wingard does care about making content. I mean, he did say in the commentary that this was his film to propose a Star Wars movie. Do I like that statement? Not really, but he was trying to put himself out there and say, I can do content, right? I think he would do better at original work. I've heard The Guest and You're Next, his 2 horror movies are amazing. So maybe he does better at original projects. Maybe he should do his own original kaiju movie. Maybe it'd be better. I don't know. I wouldn't be against that. We have Samson here. Remember how the movie was originally advertised as The Woods, and then at the last second it was revealed it was The Blair Witch. And yes, so what had happened is you can see a lot of posters called The Woods, and a lot of people were like, this looks like a Blair Witch movie, and it actually ended up being a Blair Witch movie. They were just keeping that secret for a while.
Now, I have a question for you, Elijah, and I need clarity on if this is really an Elijah opinion. So this is going back to the performance.
Okay.
If this is an Elijah opinion, or if this is a Littlest Gatekeeper opinion, right?
Okay.
I have heard you say, and I've heard you say this on stream, so this is not me revealing any behind the scenes or any private conversations. You have said this in public, that you hope that GXK fails,
Right.
so that the Americans, or so that Toho takes their Godzilla toys away from them.
Right. So, and you're going to say that because I just said that I would never truly hope that a Godzilla film fails. Right.
Right.
So, I would like, okay. So it's kind of a dual-edged sword for me.
Right.
I would love for it to do good, right? Like, I don't expect it to fail, right? If it does good, then good on it. I just hope it's a good movie.
Right.
But I'm also not against the idea of it failing, right? Like, it's one of those things where I kind of ride in the middle. I don't want a Godzilla movie to absolutely bomb to the point where everything is like over. I would hate that. But I also don't want bad content to do good, right? I would rather us have good stuff at a slower rate than a lot of bad stuff at a quicker rate.
Makes sense.
So for me, it's one of those things where it's like, I don't wish for the film to do bad, but I wouldn't mind if it does bad, if it is bad. But if it is good, I want it to do good. Does that answer your question?
It does. It does. I think what I'm hearing you say is you want good content to prevail and win out over anything else.
Yes.
And if American companies cannot do right by the character, then you would be okay with Toho ripping the rights from Legendary.
Yes.
And taking Godzilla back to Japan, and then maybe letting the license come back to America in a few years when they find the right in the future, because you don't want the reputation, excuse me, of the character. And no, Samson, I don't need another apple juice. You don't want the reputation of the character tarnished, much like, we'll say, and this is an extreme example, of course, like all of these upstart horror movies that, like Winnie the Pooh slasher film, which I personally believe that films like that damage IP.
Right. And I do want to point out this. So Nathan also pointed out, and yet he, referring to me, hasn't liked anything Toho has done for the last decade. And that's true. That's honestly true. I have not watched a Godzilla movie that was released in the last 10 years still. Thankfully, it's still 10 years that I've enjoyed. And I think Jack, our friend Jack, has echoed a similar thing where it doesn't feel right. Like, as we continue to move away from the suitmation, I've lost a little bit of what makes Godzilla special to me, right? In the last handful of Godzilla movies. The only thing to that rebuttal I have is -1 already has made me feel that. And this isn't me, shilling for Toho, because I've just clarified the last 4 Toho movies are awful or not good or okay at best. And I think Singular Point's decent, but it's definitely not the best Godzilla TV show we've had, right? I think the 98 TV show is the truest and best Godzilla show we've had. I think that's a brilliant way to do it. But what Yamazaki is doing has given me a lot of hope, right? And for just to look into the podcast a bit more, this month we're covering all Takashi Yamazaki movies. We've covered Returner, we just released Parasite Part 2, and we have 2 more weeks left with Yamazaki titles. I would venture out to say that doing this month has made me more excited and more hopeful and more confident in Yamazaki's ability to make a Godzilla movie. Every episode at the end, the question is asked, how does this movie make you feel about him doing a Godzilla movie? Because that's why we're doing a Yamazaki month. Is -1, right? Like we're trying to look into his filmography before we go see the film that we're most excited for, right? And each week so far, out of the three movies we've covered, I've had a lot of hope built because I've been able to look and see how he does stuff. And if you want to hear that, like, definitely go check out those episodes, because we dive into all of his movies. And I think it would be not all of his movies, but the ones that are available in the United States. And I think that I would say that everybody should watch Yamazaki's films before you see -1. I think he has done a lot of good stuff, and I think people would enjoy what he's done. And I can't recommend them enough. Jumping in here, Kim is popping in before she goes to bed. Hi, Kim. Hope you're doing well. And then we have Samson here saying that's why I only watch Showa. Showa is the only era that is fun if you're into that kind of thing like I am. I personally don't like Heisei and Out of the Millennium. I only really like 2000 and GMK. And I'm a Showa fan as well, Samson. So I understand where you're coming from there. And that's why I'm so excited for -1. I think that movie has a lot in store. And I think Yamazaki has proven himself based off of what he said in the films he's done that he might be able to pull out a Showa movie using modern effects. And that excites me. That interests me. And I want to see what happens with that because I have so many questions and I'm so interested in hearing what he can do. And I've talked a lot about this, so I'd like Michael to kind of jump in here if he has anything really to say.
About -1?
Anything we've said here.
I haven't watched a ton of Yamazaki's movies. In fact, I haven't watched any of Yamazaki's movies. So I would love a recommendation of what movies would you recommend I watch before December, before -1.
So the good thing about Yamazaki, the only movies you can get here in the States are Returner, his second movie, Space Battleship Yamato, his first major IP imagining, Parasite Part 1 and 2, another adaptation of an IP, and then you have The Great War of Archimedes, which is a war movie. I haven't seen that. I actually just bought that today on Amazon. It's going to be shipped, and I'm going to watch it. Because Honda started with war films, right? Honda and Tsuburaya both did war films before he did Godzilla. So the fact that Yamazaki has done those, he did one called The Eternal Zero, which is a very controversial movie because of its coverage of Zero pilots. That kind of falls in line with Oppenheimer, and Oppenheimer has seen a similar controversy of, is it pro-war, is it anti-war, what is it?
Right.
That it's very, I'm curious. I'd love to see that. He got Academy Award noms for that. I'd love to see where that goes. And I would say, Michael, watch them all. I would highly recommend the Parasite duology, but I think watching all of them is worth it. Go ahead.
Which do you think is the most what's the word? The most all-encompassing, like the best example of his directing style? Like, what is the best example of his directing style?
Ooh, that question's a little... So I still need to watch The Great War of Archimedes to give you a complete answer, but I would say Parasite Part 1.
Okay.
If I had to pick one, I'd say Parasite Part 1, I think.
Okay.
Jumping in here. So Samson said I shouldn't say I only watch Showa. That makes me sound like an asshole. I do watch everything, but with rewatchability, it lies solely with Showa, and I definitely understand that. Samson also says there's Parasite 2. So I'm talking about, you have the South Korean film directed by Bong Joon-ho, Parasite, right?
Right. Yep.
But before that, in 2014 and 2015, there was a movie called Parasite, Parsyte.
Yes, this is not the same one that won the awards. It's like,
correct.
Yes, Bong Joon-ho won the award. That's the one that won the awards. Yeah, this is totally different.
Parasite is basically a Japanese version of The Thing. If I'm being very basic, it's more than that. But that's like at its basic level, that's what Parasite is. That duology is basically Japanese The Thing. Helmy says that they absolutely loved the Battleship Yamato movie, and I'm happy to hear that because I enjoyed it a lot myself. And Helmy has the Zero movie on Blu-ray. I'm very jealous at that because it's not available in the States, and I'd love to watch it. So yeah, and I'd love to hear what you think of his movies, Michael. Being the fan you are.
Because we are, I mean, we're getting ready to go on that trip in December.
Yes.
To go watch -1 together. A lot of us just, we haven't talked about it, and it's really just not like, I guess it's not a big deal, but a few of us are planning on getting together as fans, not content creators, as fans, to go watch -1 in Nashville. And I would like some familiarity with Yamazaki's films so that I kind of know what I'm getting into.
Right. And I think so you can stream Returner, I think it's on a streaming site. Parasite Part 1 and 2 and Battleship Yamato might be available on Crunchyroll. And then The Great War of Archimedes is only available on Blu-ray through Wells Go USA. But they're all, I mean, Parasite Part 1 and 2 is like a $40 Blu-ray because it's 2 movies. But they're all pretty reasonable and you can get them for a decent price. If you don't want to go, if you would rather buy the physical copies. Helmy says that they love the anime and they've yet to see the real life adaptation. Helmy, if you're talking about the Parasite movies, I would highly recommend them. And I've never seen the anime, but I've heard a lot of good things about it. I know it was made to kind of help market the movies. It started as the first one went into theaters and it ended right as the second one went into theaters. So I've been interested and I've thought about watching it, but I just haven't yet. And then Michael brings up how Returner is cheap and very easy to find on DVD. You've probably seen the trailer for it too, Michael. It was on every Sony DVD that they put out in the early to mid 2000s.
You mean Sony... you mean Nathan?
Huh?
You called Nathan Michael?
Oh yeah, I meant Nathan, and I was talking to you, Michael, about how.
All right, I'm leaving. We're not doing this.
Oh
We're not doing this anymore.
Oh no!
Okay, we're not doing this anymore. We're not doing this anymore.
Well, that's the first. Well, I guess that's not the first time I've had somebody walk off. I had somebody once walk off because they didn't like my directing. But oh, he's back.
I have a question, Elijah. What is your longest stream to date? How long did you and Nathan go for?
Do you want to rephrase that question?
Oh, sorry. How long were you and Nathan streaming together for?
4 hours and 19 minutes. Danny still holds the record for 4 hours and 39 minutes. You'd have to do 4 hours and 45 minutes to like have an actual winning streak. Now, in all fairness, nobody has beaten Jack technically because Jack was on 2 streams and Jack's 2 streams together add up to about 6 hours. I'm sure nobody can imagine talking to me for 6 hours. Like, that sounds awful.
I mean, probably our conversations through the week probably add up to about that, but not in one setting, no. Now, I have had the pleasure, air quotes, of talking to Nathan on a stream or an episode for that long. Samson, I can beat that. I'd like to see you try. I'd like to see you try, Samson.
Maybe.
Maybe.
So have we kind of reached the end of this conversation?
I think we've reached the ultimate conclusion to the conversation.
Okay. Well,
we came out swinging. And now we've landed the plane.
Right. And with that, the way this works is now we're officially done. We're not going to keep the stream going much longer. We're just going to do our shameless self-promotion
Shameless self-promotion.
that we here at Kaiju Conversation believe in. But with that, yeah, we never like to beat a dead horse, even though I do that every recording, talking about how awful certain movies are. But we don't do that on these streams. So, Michael, before I get rambling, why don't you tell the lovely people where they can find you at?
Well, we haven't really talked about, I'm surprised we haven't, but the conversation just hasn't went there. But kaijuramenmedia.com, kaiju_ramen on Twitter is where you can find all things related to Kaiju Ramen, the magazine, the podcast, Kaiju Weekly, etc. There's also the Power Trip, a journey through the Power Rangers franchise that I host with our mutual friend Nathan Marchand. We're getting ready to publish our episode on Car Ranger, which is long overdue, and then we're going to be recording very soon an episode on Mega Ranger with our friend Kim, Kaiju Kim. So that'll be a fun episode. Outside of that, you can follow me personally on Twitter at Let's Can This Bish, which is an inside joke. And you can, all my thoughts there are my own. They have nothing related to the magazine or anything like that. That is all my crazy, oftentimes just introspective, talking out loud thoughts.
All right. Anything else you'd like to add?
This has been a really good conversation.
Oh,
and
good.
less gatekeepery than I was expecting.
Well, I'm full of surprises. Speaking of surprises, hi, my name's Elijah. You can find me on YouTube at ET13 Productions, on Instagram at ET13 Productions, or on Twitter at ET13 Productions. If you want to find my personal socials, I won't tell you, but it's not that difficult. They're pretty easy to find. Now, as for the podcast, you could always hop onto iTunes and gives us a rating that boosts our ratings and helps us get recommended to more people just like you. If you don't have an Apple device, which I don't blame you, I definitely do. I need to fix that in my script because I'm streaming right now on a MacBook. You can rate us on Spotify now. They give that option. If you want to stay up to date with all things Kaiju Conversation related, follow us on Twitter, or X now, I guess, at KAIJU_CONVERS. If you don't have Twitter, you can follow us on Instagram or like us on Facebook at the same handles. If you're like me before podcasting and streaming, you don't have any social media, lucky you, you can email us at kaijuconversation@gmail.com, all lowercase, all one word, you know the drill. And as always, we'll read your reviews on air for everyone to hear. We also have a Teespring store. Eventually, we'll have original artwork on there, but until then, you can sport our awesome logo on a t-shirt, or maybe even a coffee mug. If you'd like to chat with me or Rex, my co-host, or other people that have similar interests to you, you can check out our Discord server full of other people. It's a great community full of great people. Don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel and hit the bell so you can be notified anytime we upload a video. We have exclusives to the channel like live streams or bloopers or mini-sodes talking about news or other subjects. We also have an interview with the 2021 Mechagodzilla designer, Jared Kerchevsky. I definitely butchered his name. I'm sorry, but that's on the channel if you want to check that out. And a huge thanks to Rex for editing all of the episodes of the podcast and the other content we do. Unfortunately, due to time zone constraints, he could not be on here, but eventually I'd love to have him on here so we can harass each other and have a jolly good time. Along with Rex, we'd like to give a huge thanks and shout out to Danny DeMana of the Godzilla Novelization Project for his amazing vocals on our theme song. You can support him by following him on Twitter at danzilla93_GNP or visit his website, GodzillaNovelizationProject.com. And a huge thanks to Gratton Conwell from the podcast Giant Monster BS for composing the music for our theme song. You can support him by going to Twitter and going to @GiantMonsterBS or on any podcast platform under the name Giant Monster BS. And with that, we're going to wrap up this great conversation. Thank you so much, Michael, for agreeing to hop on here and chat for 3 hours. It was a lot of fun. I had a great time. So thank you. And with that, we're going to wrap things up here. So it's now time for my favorite part to say thank you guys so much for listening. And as always, please remember, life's too short to not talk big. Bye, guys.
And help control the giant monster population. Have your
Samson Wests.
Samson Wests spayed or neutered.
Bye, guys.